Hey everyone, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you. Should be yet another great late night conversation. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We are going to have a great chat. Let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome. So glad to be here with all of you. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with the way we do things on these streams, generally I give my opening remarks. That's whatever it is I'm going to talk about for tonight. I talk about the topic while I am giving my opening remarks. We do the roll call, where I find out who is on the other side of the camera. We find out who's watching. It's always really exciting, names and locations, and we find out who's watching from around the world, from across the United States. That part is always really, really great. Then, after I do the roll call and after I do the opening remarks, at that point, I answer your questions for the rest of the night. So if you have something you would like me to talk about in the second half of our program, by all means, send me a super chat here on YouTube or send me a Rumble rant on Rumble. Always appreciate it. And there's a Rumble rant from last night from Rachel that I didn't answer. So that'll be the first one I answer tonight. It will be Rachel's. Send me a reminder. I'll be answering Rachel's Rumble rant. Yeah, it's going to be good. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We're going to run right into it. A lot of great things are happening. So, second half of the show is all your questions. First half of the show is me talking as the questions come in. We have a roll call in the middle. So I'm going to jump right into it. In Russia, today, it's actually yesterday in Russia, but it's still May 9th, Victory Day today. In Russia, they had a very big parade today to celebrate, to commemorate the victory over fascism in the Second World War. And there was also an important speech made by the Russian president. And the display that we saw in Moscow is yet another confirmation of something that I have been trying to communicate on these streams for quite some time, which is that there is a new world arising beyond the rule of Wall Street and London. There's a whole section of the planet that is not held back by the irrationality of a system based on profits. There's a whole section of the world that is refusing to be degrown and crushed. I maintain that we live under capitalism in its monopolistic stage, imperialism, a system where big banks and corporations dominate the world and make themselves rich by keeping the world poor and grinding countries into poverty. I maintain that the wars U.S. leaders wage are waged in order to try and protect that system. And the targets tend to be countries that have broken free from imperialism, seized control of their own economies, and launched a course for developing independently of the dominance of foreign corporations, the dominance of Wall Street, the dominance of London. And there is a big section of the planet that as a result of what started with the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, continued with the Chinese Revolution of 1949, and then the wave of anti-colonial national liberation movements in the Middle East, in Latin America, in Africa, in the various corners of the planet, in Asia. There's a whole block of the planet that is free from Wall Street's domination and doing its best, holding off attacks and onslaught as they try and raise their people up from poverty. And that Russia and China, the two Eurasian superpowers, sit at the center of this rising anti-imperialist bloc. And I'm going to show you this world, this anti-imperialist world that is rising. And I will begin by showing you the highlights from the parade that happened yesterday. This is the parade in Moscow to celebrate the defeat of the Nazis and the victory, the war of national liberation, the great patriotic war in which the Nazis were defeated, in which the global communist movement rallied people from all across the world into a global united front against fascism, and the Nazis were defeated. Here was the massive parade and celebration in Moscow.
Военнослужащие почетного...
Торжественному маршу!
Витязи и стрижи. Возглавляет группу полковник Андрей Алексеев. Небо над Красной площадью расцвечивает цвета государственного флага летов штурмовиков Су-25БМ. Возглавляет группу подполковник.
So, yeah, many people have noticed and commented on the fact that there were a lot of hammers and sickles in that parade. And we might as well talk about the hammer and sickle, right? This is the emblem that was on the flag of the Soviet Union at the time that it defeated Hitler, right? Was in the corner of the Soviet flag. Now, what does this symbol mean? A lot of people think it's a Russian symbol. This is somehow a symbol of Russia. And if they think that, they are wrong. This symbol was used by the communists in China when they formed their People's Liberation Army. This symbol is used in India by communists. This symbol is used. It was even used in the United States by the Communist Party of the United States. So what does this symbol mean? Well, the hammer represents industrial workers, factory workers, the working class, those who produce the wealth of the world in factories. Nowadays, factory workers don't use hammers that much. Hammers are something that maybe a carpenter would use or a craftsman, but factory workers on the assembly line aren't using hammers as much. But everyone knows that a hammer is a symbol of labor. A hammer is a symbol of toil. Now, the other thing, right, that curvy, knifey looking thing, that's an even more obscure item. That's what they call a sickle. And nowadays, that is an agricultural tool that is not widely used. Now, my grandfather, he was a farmer, a lifelong farmer, and he did have in his garage or in his shed, I guess his farm shed. I remember in his farm shed when I was a kid seeing a really, really old rusty sickle that my grandfather had from probably years ago when, that was used by farmers, right? If you went to go cut down the corn or cut the wheat, you had to have a curvy knifey thingy. You didn't have a machine back in those days. But the sickle is an agricultural tool, and it was to represent the peasantry. And the Russian government considered itself to be what they called a revolutionary dictatorship of the workers and the peasants, the factory workers and the farm workers, the workers and the peasants. A worker and peasant government, or sometimes translated as a worker and workers and farmers government. That's what the hammer and the sickle stand for. Now, the star at the top represents the Communist Party, which is the political organization that is guiding the revolutionary dictatorship or the revolutionary government of the workers and the farmers. And when the Soviet Union, first it was Soviet Russia, and then as more countries came and got involved, it became the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union came into existence, that was the symbol that they used to represent their revolutionary government. A revolutionary dictatorship of the workers and peasants, a worker and farmer government led by the Communist Party. And when the Bolsheviks took power, they made clear they were an anti-imperialist organization. One of the very first things that they organized was what they called the Baku Congress, or the Congress of the Peoples of the East. And I've got a picture of it right here, the Baku Congress of 1920. And at that Congress, there were Muslims from all over the Muslim world. There were Africans, and there were people from Asia, this Congress of the Peoples of the East. And at that conference, the Bolsheviks made clear that they would support anyone who was fighting against colonialism, anyone who was fighting against Western capitalism, because they saw their revolution as part of a global struggle against capitalism in its monopolistic stage, imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. And they included Black Americans, African Americans in the United States, as part of the anti-colonial movement. They considered Black people in the USA to be a colonized people who were super exploited, not simply exploited as workers, but exploited as members of an oppressed nation. And the Soviet Union supported Marcus Garvey, and they supported the Black liberation movement. They called for the independence of the Black Belt region of the U.S. South because they saw that the people living there, the descendants of slaves who lived in the Black Belt region of the U.S. South, were a colonized people. They called for the liberation of African countries from colonialism. They called for the liberation of the Arab peoples of the Middle East from colonialism and from the puppet regimes set up by the Sykes-Picot Agreement after World War I. They supported Asian people in their struggle for national liberation. Dr. Sun Yat-sen was the leader of the Chinese nationalist KMT movement, and he attended what was called the Communist International, the gatherings of the Communist International. And even though he wasn't a communist, he observed and participated in the gatherings as an observer, a non-member of the Communist International. The Emir of Afghanistan, who was a monarch, a feudal monarchist, who was battling the British Empire, he got support from the Bolsheviks because he was fighting the British Empire, and Western colonialism and Western imperialism was considered to be the main danger to all of humanity. And it's because of the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 that there has been a wave of anti-imperialist and anti-colonial revolutions from the rise of Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, the rise of Gaddafi in Libya, the victory of Nelson Mandela in South Africa, the victory of Robert Mugabe, and the defeat of Rhodesia, and the creation of Zimbabwe. You can go over, so many anti-colonial revolutions happened in the 20th century, and they would never have happened if it hadn't been for the first anti-imperialist revolution, which was the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. And it gave rise to the Chinese Revolution that led China to become the second largest economy in the world. It gave rise to the Cuban Revolution, which led Cuba to independent economic development, having the world's best medical school, one of the best medical systems in the world, the highest life expectancy in Latin America. There's just been a wave. You can talk about the Ba'athist uprisings and the rise of Ba'athist Arab socialism in the Middle East, or the Islamic Revolution of Iran, right? That there was a wave of heroic anti-colonial uprisings, and the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 was very much the catalyst in the aftermath of World War I. During World War I, the Bolsheviks said to the workers, turn your guns around, make war against the war makers. And they rose up, and that is how they established the worker and farmer government. And it was in response to the success of the Bolshevik Revolution, as well as the capitalist economic meltdown of 1929, that you saw the rise of Hitler in Germany. And fascism arose as an attempt to stabilize Western capitalism and save capitalism from itself. Capitalism, when it breaks down into an economic crisis, the ruling class began fighting with each other. Different factions in the ruling class seize power. And as they seize power, they try to reboot the economy. And fascism is rooted in economic policies of degrowth, creating a slave labor underclass, stimulating the economy by building weapons and tanks and bombs and guns, creating an economy centered around prisons and imprisonment and the breaking of labor unions, etc. And the Nazi economy had somewhat of an economic boom for the first couple years of its existence. But by the end of the 1930s, it was very clear that the only way the Nazi state could preserve itself was to go to war. And even though the Soviet Union was able to buy time temporarily with the non-aggression pact of 1939, it was only a temporary pact to buy time, to block the Nazis temporarily, because eventually the Nazis broke that pact and invaded the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union mobilized all of its people in one of the most heroic fights, probably the most heroic fight in all of human history, to repel the Nazi invaders. And a global fight against fascism happened. Communists in France formed La Resistance and blew up railroad tracks, and communists in Germany got jobs in armaments factories and sabotaged the bombs that they were making. And communists in Italy formed the partisan armed resistance brigades and went around liberating territory. And communists all over Europe were on the side of the Soviet Union. When they would execute communist resistance fighters, they would line them up to shoot them, and they would hold their fists up in the air and shout, "Stalin! Stalin!" They would shout before they were killed, because Stalin was the leader of this global anti-fascist movement, and the whole world was in utter awe at the bravery and heroism of the Soviet people. No one expected the Soviet Union to win the Battle of Stalingrad, to repel the Nazi invaders, and to march into Berlin. It was the Soviet Union that liberated Auschwitz concentration camp. It was the Soviet Union that took Berlin and left Hitler in a bunker committing suicide. This is the history that we are never told, that the greatest anti-fascist fighters by far were the communists of the world, led by the Soviet Union. And this is the history that Russia is fighting for as it battles against those who sympathize with the Nazis in Ukraine. The US-backed ultra-nationalist regime in Ukraine glorifies Stepan Bandera, an individual who collaborated with the Nazis, an individual who rounded up Jews and Poles and put them into concentration camps. And there is a huge effort to denigrate and lie about the amazing heroic deeds of the Soviet people in their effort to defeat fascism. And that is why, at a time that Russia is waging an existential war, battling for its existence in Kiev or in the Donbass, as that is happening, Russia must have a very big event to commemorate the heroic victory over fascism led by the Soviet people. And they do so with pride in their heritage, recognizing that the very same fight that went on back then, the fight of the imperialists and the colonizers to overturn the wave of anti-colonial revolutions that broke out, that fight continues. And that what the United States and NATO are currently doing in Ukraine is just a continuation of what Adolf Hitler did in 1939 when he invaded the Soviet Union. It is just a continuation of what Japan did in 1937 when it invaded China. That the Second World War was a battle between the dying Western system and all the countries around the world that had broken free from it. And there was a division among the imperialists, and one faction of the imperialists was able to align with the Soviet Union. But ultimately, it was the German, Japanese, and Italian imperialists in their attempt to re-seize their colonies and reassert their power as colonizers. It was their effort to destroy the Soviet Union, first with the Italians crushing Ethiopia, and then with the Nazis marching into Poland and eventually marching into the Soviet Union. It was that fight, that drive of the imperialists to save their system by trying to crush the anti-colonial resistance forces of the world that were led by the Soviet Union. That was what drove the Nazis and their horrendous atrocity. And they were motivated, of course, by a deep economic crisis rooted in the problems of technology, rooted in the capitalist foundations of the economy, where poverty is created by abundance. Poverty amid plenty persists. That is what created the war crisis. That's what brought the fascist regimes to power. And that is what ultimately drove the fascist regimes, after 5 or 6 years of stabilizing their economies with heavy-handed repression, to then march in and begin expanding. That was the basis of the Second World War. And that is the same basis for which the United States is attacking Russia today. The same basis for which the United States is attacking China today. The same basis upon which the U.S. imperialists are backing Israel as it bombs Gaza and murders Palestinians. The same basis upon which sanctions are imposed against the Islamic Republic of Iran and coup attempts continue against Venezuela. It is the drive of a dying order. Imperialism, capitalism in its monopolistic stage. It is that dying order fighting for its existence that motivates their wars. And it is the inconsistency and the irrational and the instability, the irrationality and instability of that system, which forces the imperialists to become more and more desperate. And I will point out that the forces currently guiding Israel are forces that were on the side of the Nazis during the Second World War. Prior to the Second World War, there were two wings of the Zionist movement. Communists and Marxists have always rejected all Zionism, right? Communists and Marxists have said that the road to liberation for Jewish people is assimilation, joining with other working class people and liquidating what was a culture that was specifically formed for the role of Jewish people as usurers in the feudal economy. It was liquidating that culture and merging with the working class majority. That led to the liberation of Jewish people. Theodor Herzl founded the World Zionist Organization in order to separate Jewish people from the rest of the working class and to make the case that Jews could become effective colonial settlers in the British Mandate of Palestine. But among the Zionists, there were two factions. The first faction was called Haganah, and Haganah were social democrat, labor Zionists who said that they could mix some element of watered down Marxism, watered down socialism and welfare programs and cooperatives in with their colonial settler policies. But there was a second wing of the global Zionist movement, and that was called Irgun, or the revisionist party. And Irgun was not social democratic, but rather fascistic. And the founders of Irgun admired Adolf Hitler, and they admired Benito Mussolini, and they argued that it was a good thing that Hitler took power in Germany because it would encourage more Jews to leave Europe and move to Palestine and set up settlements. And furthermore, they tried to negotiate with the Nazi state for the moving of European Jews to Palestine. And they argued that the rise of Hitler was natural, that Jews would never fit in with European society. So Hitler made sense. And there's even some very ugly quotes from the founders of Irgun saying that what Hitler did for the Germans, what Mussolini did for the Italians, that is what we, the revisionist party Irgun, want to do for the Jews. The Irgun organization were Jewish fascists. They admired the global fascist movement. They advocated the creation of a Jewish ethno-state. They rejected the liberal and social democratic vision of some of the other Zionist factions, and they developed their own school of Zionism called revisionism. And today, that is the political party that runs Israel. The Likud party is, and openly admits that it is, the inheritor of Irgun. Let me repeat that. Go look this up. The Likud party, Benjamin Netanyahu's party, considers itself to be the inheritor of Irgun, the pro-Nazi wing of the Zionist movement. So whenever they try to lecture you about some Palestinian leader who was fighting the British Empire, so he said sympathetic things about Hitler, ask about Irgun and their sympathy with the Nazis and their collaboration with the Nazis and their statements that it was a good thing and their celebration when Hitler took power in Germany because they thought it would force Jews to flee to Palestine and it would get rid of the Marxist idea of assimilation. Ask about that. Today, Israel, the center of the global imperialist fight, is being condemned by all humanity for its atrocities against the Palestinians. Even some who feel that Israel should exist look at what Israel is doing in utter horror. And Israel, led by fascists and admirers of Hitler, just like the Ukrainian Nazi element that admires Stepan Bandera, these forces represent the same dying system and its drive to recolonize the world, and its drive to implement degrowth and save a deeply irrational system. Perhaps I am speaking in language that is a bit much for people to take. Perhaps the words that I am using are bold for people to hear, but this is the reality. And World War II continues. World War II ended. A wave of anti-colonial liberation movements broke out. A lot has happened. The Soviet Union fell. Russia regained its status as an independent country with the rise of Putin, the defeat of neoliberalism and Yeltsin. China has adjusted its socialist system. There's a lot of changes that have gone on in the world of anti-imperialism today, but the foundations of the Second World War still exist. And Russia and China still sit at the center of the global anti-imperialist movement. And the imperialist system is still becoming fascistic and driving for war, rooted in the same fundamental problems, the problem of overproduction, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, etc. So now I am going to show you the Russian president's great speech that he gave, and then I'm going to show you some other highlights from the global anti-imperialist movement. So this is the Russian president's speech from today or yesterday, depending on where you are in the world.
Citizens of Russia, dear veterans, comrade soldiers and sailors, sergeants and warrant officers, midshipmen and sergeant majors, comrade officers, generals and admirals, soldiers and commanders participating in the special military operation. Happy Victory Day. This is the most important, truly popular and sacred day when we honor our fathers and grandfathers who fought to protect our land and to crush the scourge of Nazism and liberated the peoples of Europe and achieved the peak of military and labor glory. We see attempts to distort the truth. It is inconvenient to those who have grown used to building new colonial policies. They honor those who fought alongside Nazism. They erect monuments to...
What he's describing is absolutely true. They have denigrated and concealed the history of the heroic communist-led anti-fascist war. It's inconvenient because they are colonizers.
Those complicit with Hitler. And they want to erase the memory of the great feats of our forefathers. This revanchism and this attempt to whitewash the crimes of Nazism is just part of the Western policy aimed to ignite new regional conflicts, to stoke religious and ethnic hatred, to stifle independent centers of global development. We reject the claims of any state or alliance to exclusivity. We know the consequences of such limitless ambition. Russia will do everything in its power to prevent this, but we will never allow anyone to threaten us. Our strategic forces are always ready. The West wants to forget the lessons of the Second World War, but we remember how the fate of humankind was decided in the battles of Moscow, Leningrad, Rzhev, Stalingrad, Kursk and Kharkov, Minsk, Smolensk and Kiev. In dire battles from Murmansk and the Caucasus to Crimea. The hardest, longest years of the Great Patriotic War. The fighters of the Soviet Union fought against Nazism almost alone, while the Wehrmacht was supported by all of Europe, Russia, and never tried to diminish the role of the Allies and the Second Front. We honor all those who fell while fighting Hitler, those who were part of the resistance.
And that's true. The Western leaders held off opening a second front for a really long time because they wanted to hurt the Soviet Union. You know, the USA did not land in Normandy until 1944, when the Soviet Union had already turned the tide of the war, right? That for quite a long time, the Soviet Union was left in Europe to fight alone, while the USA focused on the Pacific.
The courage of the people of China who fought against the militarist aggression of Japan. And we will always remember, and we'll never forget, our common struggle and the inspiring traditions that we had together. Comrades, Russia is now going through a historic point. Its fate, its future depends on every single one of us. And today, on this Victory Day, we recognize this especially clearly, and we honor the generation of heroes, and we accept their tradition of friendship and fortitude, of being confident in yourself and in your country, and love your motherland sincerely. We honor the veterans of the special military operation. All of those who are fighting along the contact line are our heroes. We bow down to their courage and self-sacrifice.
These are real heroes. I met some of these young people who are defending their community, dropping out of college so they can fight for their community in Donetsk and in Luhansk and other places. There are some real heroes out there, people younger than me, who love their community and their country and their grandparents so much that they are willing to go out and risk it all. I wish you had the opportunity to meet the people that I met when I was in Russia. I really wish you had the opportunity to do that.
Russia is united to support you. Our veterans believe in you. They feel part of your fate. We are one people, and this is a generation of heroes. We bow down before all of those who sacrificed their lives for the victory in the Great Patriotic War, and we honor their memory, their sons, their wives, their brothers and sisters, all of their families and friends. We bow down to the veterans of the Great Patriotic War who have left this world, as well as the civilians who suffered and died as a result of the atrocious crimes of the Nazis, and those who have died fighting for our country. A minute of silence. Thank you. Dear veterans, comrades, friends, May the 9th is always a deeply emotional and poignant day. Every family has its own heroes to celebrate. To look at the photographs, to the faces they hold dear, and they remember their stories about how they fought and how they worked. The Victory Day unites all the generations, and we march forward, relying on our centuries-old traditions, and we are confident that together we will secure a safe and proud future for Russia as a single people. Glory to the armed forces, for Russia, for victory. Hurrah!
Wow. So I did mention that I had the opportunity to meet with somebody who is currently fighting in Donetsk in Lugansk. He's fighting for his country and his community, and I realized that I have not yet released that video. So I think when is a better time to show it? I might as well show you all that video if I can, if I've got it here. Right. Um, Let me see if I have that video. I guess I don't have. It's part of another video I did about the World Youth Festival. But I guess I'll just show you a picture of me with this young guy who's a young volunteer from Luhansk, who's fighting for his community and fighting for his people, right? Young university student from Lugansk. There he is with our CPI book, and he gave me a badge that says, "I love Lugansk." And he's got our CPI book, "Russia is Not Our Enemy." It was really, really an honor to meet him. So I want to show you a few things. I've got some highlights from the anti-imperialist world, but in light of that amazing speech we just heard from the Russian president, I do want to show you a couple different things. So the first thing I want to show you is that Russia and Cuba are closer than ever. If you like Cuba, you should love Russia, because the two countries are closer than ever. And I've got a video of that. Hold on. I will show you the recent interaction between the Cuban president, who was there for the Victory Day events, and the Russian president.
Deseo reafirmar una vez más el interés y el compromiso de Cuba con el desarrollo de una cooperación mutuamente beneficiosa con la Unión Económica Euroasiática y sus Estados miembros. Somos un país pequeño, sometido desde hace 6 décadas a un bloqueo económico, comercial y financiero, recrudecido en los últimos años con medidas especialmente diseñadas para impedir el éxito de los planes de desarrollo y hacer más difícil la vida cotidiana del pueblo. La injusta inclusión de Cuba en la espuria lista estadounidense de estados que supuestamente patrocinan el terrorismo ha tenido un efecto nefasto en la operatividad financiera del país, provocando una situación muy tensa en la economía que el pueblo cubano enfrenta con admirable valentía y creatividad. Bajo tales condiciones, la histórica comprensión, amistad y apoyo de países como los que integran la UEA tiene un valor inestimable que Cuba agradece profundamente.
This is the Cuban president thanking the Russian Economic Union, the Eurasian Economic Union, for its support of Cuba and its efforts to work with Cuba in light of the brutal U.S. blockade, the labeling of terrorism, of Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism, etc. This is very important.
Hago llegar a todos el sentimiento de gratitud del pueblo y gobierno cubanos por el voto a favor de la resolución contra el bloqueo que abrumadoramente adopta cada año la Asamblea General de Naciones Unidas y que continuaremos presentando mientras se mantenga esa ilegal, injusta y genocida política. Quienes nos bloquean jamás podrán comprender y por tanto tampoco impedir las excelentes relaciones entre nuestros países y la visión compartida de que es posible.
What does it say? It says, those who blockade us will never be able to understand, and therefore will not be able to prevent the excellent relations between our countries and the shared vision of a better world is possible. Very important words from the Cuban president.
Un mundo mejor y podemos hacerlo juntos, basado en principios de cooperación, respeto mutuo y bienestar compartido, valores todos que distinguen a esta unión. Estimados amigos, a las puertas del 10º aniversario de esta formidable asociación, reiteramos la felicitación con la absoluta confianza de que los resultados de esta década y las decisiones emanadas de la reunión de hoy servirán de base para continuar impulsando y fortaleciendo el desarrollo económico sostenible de todas las naciones involucradas en aras de una mayor prosperidad para nuestros pueblos. En ese empeño, cuenten siempre con Cuba. Muchas gracias.
So that's very, very, very important. Now, in addition to that, we also have, and I think it's very important to talk about, our organization, the Center for Political Innovation. We are the U.S. wing of the global anti-imperialist and anti-colonial movement, right? I mean, there are others like the Uhuru movement that's been raided by the FBI that leads Black people for their independence and for economic development. But we, the Center for Political Innovation, we consider ourselves to be the U.S. wing of the global resistance to imperialism. And we also consider the future of the American people, the road to a more prosperous America, to be with this new economy that is rising. So we begin every meeting that we have with the Pledge of Unity. And I'm actually going to show you the opening of our reception after the great Rage Against the War Machine rally last year, where Tyler led the opening of the Pledge of Unity. There was some music as people were eating their food. And then we began with the Pledge of Unity. I'm going to show you every CPI rally, conference, and event. Every Zoom call begins with this pledge.
It's a mighty hard road that my poor hands have hoed. My poor feet have traveled a hot, dusty road. Out of your dust bowl and westward we rode, and your desert was hot, and your mountain was cold. I've worked in your orchards of peaches and prunes. I've slept on the ground in the light of the moon. At the edge of the cities you'll see us, and then we come with the dust, and we go with the wind. California, Arizona, I harvest your crops. Well, it's north up to Oregon to gather your hops. Take the beets from your ground cut, the grapes from your vine, to set on your table your light, sparkling wine. Green pastures aplenty from dry desert ground, from the Grand Coulee Dam where the waters run down. Every state in the Union us migrants have been, and we'll work in this fight, and we'll fight till we win. It's always we've rambled that river and I, all along your green valley. I'll work till I die. This land I'll defend with my life if need be, 'cause the pastures of plenty must always be free. It's a mighty hard road that my poor hands have hoed. My poor feet have traveled a hot, dusty road. Out of your dust bowl and westward we rode, and your desert was hot, and your mountain was cold. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Let me get this out. I'm gonna get it. There we go. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm your MC tonight, yo. All right. here we go. We're going to start, to get everybody to know we're getting started, we're going to start with Dare to Struggle! 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 That's right. I love it. All right. So, I'm going to ask you guys, we're going to do something that we start off every CPI event with. And it's a moment of respect. I'll tell you a little history where it comes from. It comes from the Soviet Union, but hear me out, libertarians. I think you'll like it. Stick around. It was written by the World Democratic Youth Federation, and it came out in 1947 as a way to bring the youth of the world together against war. So anytime we have a meeting, we recite the Pledge of Unity. We put up our right hand, and you don't need to know it because I'm going to say it, and you can repeat it, all right? And we've replaced youth with people, so here we go. The CPI Pledge of Unity. Hold up your right hand. Everybody stand up if you wouldn't mind. Get involved. Come on, do me a solid. All right. Are you ready? Solidarity for the working class. Here we go. We pledge that we shall remember this unity. Forged at the end of the Second World War. Not only today, not only this week. This year, but always. Until we have built the world we have dreamed of and fought for. We pledge ourselves to build the unity of the people of the world. All races, all colors, all nationalities, all beliefs. To eliminate all traces of fascism from the earth. To build a deep and sincere international friendship among the peoples of the world. To keep a just and lasting peace. To eliminate want, frustration, and enforced idleness. We have come to confirm the unity of all people. To salute our comrades who have died. And pledge our word that skillful hands, keen brains, and bold enthusiasm shall never more be wasted in war. Amen. Thank you, guys.
Yes, every CPI meeting event begins with the anti-fascist pledge that comes out of the Second World War. But I got plenty of other things I want to show you because this global anti-imperialist movement is rising. That great rally that just happened in Russia, that great ceremony, parade to commemorate the victory over fascism was very important. But there are other things that are happening. First off, we had a speech by the leader of the Houthi movement, Ansar Allah. And this is Abdul Malik al-Houthi. And this is just a selection from what he said in his message to the country as the Yemeni people rally to continue to block Israeli ships and demand protection of the people in Gaza.
In the world and in Western societies themselves, the Zionists are striving to destroy the human values. They try to transform people into animals, just like any other animals, whereby they don't feel that they're special as humans compared to other animals. In some cases, they have become, in their ways of life in Europe, their lives have been transformed into the life of a dog. They bark like dogs. They try to dress, it's as if they're dogs, etc. And some try to dress like other animals, like apes or others. So there is deliberate action. There is a plan which has been put together by the Zionists to destroy the human values and to empty humans from their human essence and from their essence of values and ethics.
Wow. that the Zionists are at this point reducing people to being animals. I mean, this is heavy. That's heavy stuff that he just said there. And if you look at what's happening in our society, it's very, very true. And I would urge you to check out, we published a book, Who Are the Houthis and What Are They Fighting For? All about the Houthi movement. And that was the leader of the Houthi movement. They are just calling out our culture in the West that is reducing people to being animals and losing their humanity and their spiritual essence. Very important remarks that we heard. Now, another thing that happened is, I don't know if you're aware, but the Syrian president, Bashar Assad, he recently gave some remarks about socialism. Many people don't know that the ruling party of Syria is the Ba'athist Arab Socialist Party. And it was a party that was aligned with the Soviet Union when it came to power, Arab nationalism and socialism, and the Ba'ath movement. And so, that is their principle. They are a socialist organization. The Ba'ath Party was formed as kind of a breakaway from the Syrian Communist Party because they believed that the French were their main oppressor and they didn't want to stop fighting French colonialism during the Second World War. And they are the ruling party in Syria, and they are pro-Soviet and friendly to the Soviet Union. The Communist Party is aligned with them, as well as another communist party called the Communist Party of Syria, Bakdash. They're in the government. And this is remarks from the Syrian president about the nature of socialism around the world. This is very interesting.
الاشتراكية تطرح علينا سؤال كحزب، وهي متى ينطلق النهج الاقتصادي لحزب البعث من الإيديولوجيا؟ ومتى ينطلق من القواعد الاقتصادية؟ يعني هل هناك توافق بينهما أم هناك تناقض؟ أم هناك حل وسط نستطيع أن نؤدي الجانب أو نعتمد أو نستند إلى الجانب الإيديولوجي وبنفس الوقت القواعد العلمية الاقتصادية؟ بنفس الإطار، ما هي قدرة الاقتصاد على تحمل القواعد الإيديولوجية من دون أن يكون هذا الاقتصاد منهك وخاسر بشكل عام؟ يعني كما قلت، هو إيجاد التوازن. ما هو التوازن بين الجانب الاجتماعي والجانب الاقتصادي؟ الحقيقة كلها أسئلة تلف حول عنوان واحد، ولكن يجب أن نراها من كل الزوايا، لأننا عندما نتحدث عن التوازن بين القواعد الاقتصادية والقواعد الاجتماعية، فهذا يعني أن نسير بخط دقيق لا يكون فيه الجانب الاقتصادي مجرد على حساب المجتمع، لأننا في هذه الحالة سوف نتحول إلى حزب رأسمالي، ولا يمكن أن يسير بالعكس باتجاه الجانب الاجتماعي بشكل مجرد، لأننا عند ذلك سوف نكون دولة مفلسة. لذلك أتحدث عن كل هذه العناوين لكي نصل إلى نقطة التوازن بين الإيديولوجي وبين الاقتصادي. لو أبقينا كلمة السوق لوحدها فهذا يعني أننا تحولنا إلى اقتصاد السوق المتوحش، فكلمة الاجتماعي هي التي تحافظ على النهج الاشتراكي مع الحفاظ على المنافسة بالنسبة للسوق. هناك من سيقول لا يمكن أن يكون هناك سوق مع اشتراكية. هذا الكلام غير صحيح، لأن النموذج الصيني واضح بالنسبة للعالم. الصين تحولت باتجاه اقتصاد السوق، وهي دولة شيوعية اشتراكية مركزية منذ عام 1900.
Yeah, so he's basically saying that a market is compatible with socialism, and that they must maintain their socialist base and not simply become a capitalist state, and that China is the model of how a country can utilize the market but maintain a socialist centralized system. Very interesting comments from the Syrian president. And that's kind of where the global socialist and anti-imperialist movement is. The idea that we can have an economy that includes elements of the market, but at the same time is organized to make sure people have what they need. I also wanted to show you, right? We think of Syria as being a Muslim country, but Syria has a very large Christian population. And the Christians in Syria are some of the biggest supporters of the Syrian government because it has protected them from the Wahhabi extremists who want to exterminate them, people like ISIS, people who want to establish some kind of Wahhabi Islamic extremist government. And so on Orthodox Easter, the Armenian Christians of Syria had an Easter parade. And I want you to see the parade that the Syrian Christians had for Easter, right? Because this was the Easter parade for Orthodox Easter. The ethnically Armenian Christians of Syria, this was their Easter parade. So I'll wind it back just quickly. So that is the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad, and that's the Syrian national flag with 2 stars of the Syrian Arab Republic, not the 3 stars of the opposition. Those are Armenian national symbols. You saw that the boys marched by, right? The young men marched by in their Syrian, patriotic uniforms, right? The marching band, and then the young pioneers, the members of the youth patriotic and socialist organization, and then the women marched by, right, in their full uniforms, with their skirts on rather than pants like the boys, but they're wearing the red scarves from the communist tradition. They're the young teenage women, teenage girls. And here are the elementary aged kids from the younger organizations. See, around the world, this is what communists look like. Communists and anti-imperialists. They wear uniforms, they march, they have pledges. All the people in the West who think, well, that's cringe. You can't do that. That looks stupid. They don't know what they're talking about, right? This is what real revolutionary organizations look like. This is what the Black Panthers looked like, right? Maybe you don't believe me. Maybe I should put on a video of the Black Panthers. But there you go. This is when you have a real revolutionary movement. This is what the Communist Party USA looked like, back in the day. This is what the Black Panthers looked like when they were rallying, when they had thousands of members in the Black community supporting Huey Newton. This is what they looked like. I'll show you some footage here right now, right? So we'll look at we'll look at an actual Black Panther rally, and I'll show you what they looked like. How they marched in uniform. I think, right? Let me find one that's one of Angela Davis speaking. She was never a member of the Black Panthers. She was in the Communist Party USA. To find an actual Black Panther rally, and I'll show you it's the same kind of thing, right? Yeah, here we go. Here we go. I'm showing you actual footage of the Black Panthers from 1969. right? It's the exact same kind of thing. All the stuff that the synthetic woke left tells you is fascist, like classical music, like uniforms, like loving your country, like condemning imperialism, you know, like wanting economic development. That's what communists around the world are all about, right? That's what they're all about. Here, let's look at some footage of the Black Panthers. So here we go, the Black Panthers. Here's a Black Panther rally.
self-defense group in the limited fashion that you usually think of self-defense groups. I would like to use examples when Fidel Castro started the revolution along with Che Guevara, with 12 of them all together. They realized that they wouldn't be able to topple the oppressive regime in Cuba. What they were essentially was an educational body. They engaged with the army, they fought with the army, and they showed the people that the army was not bulletproof, that the police were not bulletproof, and that Batista's regime was not a regime that was impossible to topple. So the people started to feel their strength. The Black Panther Party feels very much the same way. We think that this educational process is necessary, and it's the people that will cause the revolution, and it's the people that will cause the change in the country. The Black Panther Party is simply the vanguard of the revolution, and we plan to teach the people the strategy and the necessary tools to liberate themselves.
Yeah, and that's very important as well. It's important to be aware of. So, look, we're here to talk about this important history, but we're mainly here to show you what's going on in the world right now and how, at this point, it's very clear there is a big section of the world that is rising against imperialism, rising against colonialism, rising to grow while the Western capitalist system is collapsing in an economic crisis rooted in the foundations of the system. Capitalism cannot handle self-driving cars. Capitalism cannot handle artificial intelligence, right? A system where human labor value is extracted, can't deal with human beings being completely eliminated from the centers of economic power and the factory floor and the means of production. And there is a big economic crisis ahead and continuing. Really, it's never ended since 2008, rooted in the irrationality of the capitalist imperialist system and its drive to make people poorer as greater abundance exists. And the only way they could save it is with fascistic degrowth methods. And we say we don't want to save it. We want a whole new America for working families in which we trade with and are friendly with all these countries that have broken out of Western capitalism and imperialism. So on that note, folks, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. And then from there, after we do our roll call, I will answer people's questions, beginning with Rachel's question. And then from there, we will answer people's new super chat questions. So any Rumble rants, any super chats people have would be great. So Mark Jones in Utica, New York, names and locations. Adelaide, Australia, Rice Jarrett, Tom in Kentucky, Ryan in Kansas City, Sydney, Australia, Bob in Troy, New York, Patch in Arizona, Chris in Salt Lake City, Rachel in Winder, Georgia, Sherry in New Jersey, Tybee in Pennsylvania, Mariah in North Carolina, David Muller in Columbia, Joe in Los Angeles. Welcome, Joe. We got Damia in Miami, Florida, aka Dionysus in Greece, Jenny in Cincinnati, Ulf in Sweden, Chris in Texas, Crooklyn in Brooklyn, Patrick in Maine, Steve and Ann in Ringgold, Georgia, Saviero in Mexico, Master Jack in South Africa. It's a strange, strange world you live in, Master Jack. Abel in Malcolm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, St. David's, Bermuda, Carolyn and Dario in Brooklyn. Shout out to you. Briggy in Pennsylvania, John McCarthy in Chicago, Philip High, PH from Brooklyn. Shout out to you. Shout out to you. Gonzalo in Argentina, Michael Labrajada in Belfast, Sean in Calgary, Canada, Isaac Peppers. Shout out to you. I met you at the event about a month ago, I guess, up here in New York at the Aero Park. Good to meet you, Isaac. Always a pleasure. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Anybody else? I see Chris Gopher in Texas is with us. Welcome, Christopher Gopher. Names and locations. We got Dave Concrete in Washington. We got Dan Nicewander from Los Angeles. Names and locations. We got Bobby from Southwest Virginia. Welcome, Bobby. Good to have you with us. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Good to have you with us here tonight. Names and locations. Names and locations. Always good to have you with us. Anybody else? Names and locations. I will then begin answering people's super chats. But I just want to make sure I get all the names and locations, that no one is left out, right? We don't want to leave anyone out here, right? Better to give everyone their say. Anybody else? Names and locations. All right. I'm not seeing more names and locations. I'm sure they'll keep trickling in. But this is the part where I remind you all, at risk of sounding a little bit like PBS, that I do live in New York City, where my rent is too damn high. I do have to maintain this 2-bedroom apartment so that I have a room just for my home studio, just for streaming. We got Noel from the Philippines. Welcome. So if you can send a super chat, not only will it give me something to talk about, but it will also, in addition to that, be supporting this YouTube channel and supporting the work that I do, enabling me to continue streaming. And I have streamed, I think, how many? I have streamed every night for the past week, I think. How long has it been since I missed an evening of streaming, right? So I did one last night, right? I did one the night before that, did one the night before that, did one the night before that, did one the night before that. Right. So at this point, I have streamed for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days in a row. I have not gone for a day without streaming in 6 days. Kiwi Corner in Auckland, New Zealand. And that's, who else streams this much? I'm not going to name names, obviously, but none of them stream this much. I am here all the time because this room is necessary, right? Part of the reason that it was necessary to move and have this extra room was so I could do these frequent live streams. So I do appreciate any support that you can offer. All of you that are watching, that are here, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, make sure you hit the notifications bell so you get notified. And I do want to say that, anything you can do in terms of sending me super chats, it's helpful. It gives me something to talk about, and it also supports my ability to maintain these streams. Another way you can support the work that we do is buy some of our books, like our book on the Houthis, like Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. Like our new CPI textbook that we just published, that supports the work that we do. And I will say that Center for Political Innovation funds are separate from the funds of myself, right? Because there was some silly innuendo before. At this point, I do not have access to CPI funds. So if you donate to CPI, that's great. That supports CPI activities, but I don't have access to those funds. So if you send a super chat, if you send a Rumble rant, if you send, if you buy one of my books, if you join on the Patreon, you are supporting this channel and my ability to do these streams. So I really, really do appreciate it. So yeah, that would be appreciated. So I'm going to start answering people's questions, but if people have more questions as they come, please send them in. please send them in and help guide the conversation as you want it to go here in our second half of the program. All right. So the first question that we got came last night, and I missed it, but Rachel is a beloved member of our community. Rachel's out in Georgia. She's a farmer. She's the sickle on that hammer and sickle, right? She's a farmer, and we appreciate Rachel, a great member of our organization who's involved in the study groups that we do, and et cetera. And we love Rachel. And she asked, what does progressive actually mean? The government has trained my brain to envision AOC and the squad every time I hear the word progressive. Well, that's an interesting question because progressive just means you're advancing, right? If you're moving backwards, you are retreating or regressing. And if you are moving forward, you are progressing, right? It has a literal meaning. Left literally means one side and right literally means the other side, right? And just like left and right have a literal meaning beyond their political meaning, progressive and regressive have a literal meaning, right? Progressive means you are moving forward. Regressive means you're moving backward. But this really goes back to the concept of left and right that come out of the French Revolution. After the French Revolution, they established what was called a National Assembly. And those who were still loyal to the king after the revolution sat on the right side of the room. And those who were still loyal to, or who were excited to move into the future and move into what they called the modern world, they sat on the left. And so left and right originally was intended to denote history moving forward. And if one is progressive, it's the idea is you're moving into the future. That's all that it literally means. But what does progressive mean? It just means you're advancing. But what does advancing mean? Right? There are many people, for example, who think that, the LGBT movement and the trans thing, that is advancing. They think that that's advancing. However, there are many people in the feminist movement, there are many religious people, there's others who say, no, that is not an advancement. So, I don't think anyone would say they're opposed to progress itself, but there is lots of disagreement about what progress means. And that is why it can be very hard to define these terms. I will say that nowadays the word progressive has kind of lost any of its meaning because many of the people in so-called left circles believe in degrowth and they believe in moving backwards. They think there are too many people in the world. They want to go back to a time when people used less technology. So how can they be progressive when humanity is progressing and they are opposed to that? How can they be progressive? So it's a word that really has no meaning. My understanding is that, generally communists and socialists consider themselves to be progressing because they're advancing historical progress. But my understanding is that the Nazis and the Italian fascists also considered themselves to be progressives, right? The Nazis described themselves as progressives. The Italians had an artistic school. The Italian fascists had an artistic school associated with them that was referred to as the futurist movement. So what does progressive really mean? It's one of those words that, being progressive is generally considered good. Now, there is a far-right thinker named Julius Evola, and Julius Evola rejected the notion of progress. He thought that progress was bad. And Julius Evola was very much a thinker associated with Italian fascism, but he wrote a book called Man Among Ruins, which is, was his critique of fascism, fascism viewed from the right, Man Among Ruins, post-war visions of an ultra-reactionary Julius Evola. And his main critique of fascism was that he argued that fascism believed in historical progress. But what's weird is if you want to buy the writings of this Italian ultra-right-winger, ultra-conservative, do you know what publishing house prints them in the United States? Well, it's a publishing house in the U.S. state of Vermont, in Burlington, the city once led by Bernie Sanders. And it's a yoga studio in Burlington, Vermont that owns the copyright to Julius Evola's writings. And I'm sure that the people at that studio most likely consider themselves to be progressive. but yet they sell books like Revolt Against the Modern World and Man Among Ruins, which are promoting a worldview that is very opposed to historical progress. And that there are, and this is where it gets all messy, right? Now people associate Eastern mysticism and all kinds of notions of degrowth, reducing consumption, reducing the population. People associate that with being a leftist or a progressive, when the very definition of being a leftist, being progressive, is believing in progress. And there are many people on the left that reject the very concept or notion of historical progress. So it gets very, very, very confusing at the end of the day. You asked me what it means. It's just one of those terms that just kind of means good, right? To most people, if you are progressing, if you are advancing, that is a good thing. And generally, it's a good thing to be progressive. And if you're moving backward, if you're losing ground, you're regressing, that's considered largely to be a bad thing. And so beyond that, the term really loses any real literal meaning. And I mean, that's why it's a confusing term. And I hope that this is a helpful point to make, Rachel. I hope this is helpful in explaining these things. At the end of the day, anyone can be progressive if they want. They just have to believe that what they're doing is making historical progress. And many of the people who now call themselves progressive openly denounce progress. I don't know how you can be a progressive and not believe in progress, but there are such people. So, I mean, explain that one to me. I don't know how that works, but that's where we're at, right? She says, in my red county, progressive is bad, progressive is Biden. Well, I would argue that Biden is degressive. He's making our country less prosperous. He's trying to destroy countries that are rising up from poverty, like Russia and China. I mean, how is bombing Gaza and killing the Palestinians, how is that progressive? I don't see that as being progressive in any way. And this is where it all gets muddled and mixed up, right? What does progressive mean? What does it even really mean? So, hey, I saw that John McCarthy sent his super chat for the video. If you can send that link one more time, I'm trying to find the link to that, but if you can send the link one more time, put it in the chat, that would make it easier for me to show that video. I do want to show that video. Thank you, John. But yeah, and so I hope that answers Rachel's question about what progressive means. All right, so next question. This is Battle Cossack, our friend out in Argentina. Shout out to you. He says, my mom gave me a copy of the Quran, and I've become interested in Islamic socialism. Where should we start? Well, Battle Cossack, at the risk of sounding like a self-promoter, I will show you exactly where you should start with Islamic socialism. Hold on one moment. You want to learn about Islamic socialism? I would say that the most successful Islamic socialist leader was Muammar Gaddafi. And the first book the Center for Political Innovation ever published was our own edition of the Green Book by Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. It was our own edition of the book. It was our first edition of the book. It was our own version. And it's the cheapest one on Amazon, and it's also the highest quality. It has page numbers. The print is a little bit small, but this book, it's 3 chapters, and it's Gaddafi explaining his Islamic view and the setup of the Islamic Socialist Jamahiriya, the Islamic Socialist government of Libya. I will say I am not an expert on Islamic socialism, right? When it comes to my knowledge of Islam, because I have visited Iran a number of times, I have mainly studied Shia Islam. And Islamic socialism is often considered to be a Sunni thing, right? Among Sunnis who aligned with Baathism in the Arab countries, you had a current of Islamic socialists, of Islamic scholars that were Sunni, that were not Wahhabi, right? Meaning they were not traditionalists, meaning they were not trying to be like Saudi Arabia and go back to the time of the Prophet. But they were also not the Muslim Brotherhood. They did not reject Arab nationalism. They did not embrace the free market. They did not consider themselves to be westernized and admirers of the West. And you had a number of scholars in Syria and in Iraq and in various Arab countries who were aligned with the Ba'athist movements, aligned with the patriotic officers, aligned with Abdul Nasser, the Arab socialist leader. And those leaders adopted beliefs that were that were Islamic teachings that lined up and aligned themselves with the Ba'ath movement. Now, Gaddafi was not a Ba'athist, right? Gaddafi was not an Arab socialist. He was an Islamic socialist. And his green book is a purely Islamic socialist text, right? It's not Ba'athist Arab nationalism. It is Islamic socialism. And Gaddafi made clear he did not consider himself to be an Arab leader. He considered himself to be an African leader. And he broke with the Arab world. He largely considered the Arab world to not be as anti-imperialist. And he actually, in this book, there is a section in the Green Book called "Black People Will Prevail in the World," where he argues that that the black man will ultimately be the leader within the next century. Because of the fact that black people are reproducing at a much higher rate than other ethnic groups in the world, and that Africa is the untapped market. Africa has so many natural resources in it, so much oil, so much minerals, so much natural gas, that ultimately, because China, first the Western world developed, then with the rise of communism, you had Russia and China, and they developed. But Africa is the part of the world that remains underdeveloped, but yet it is a part of the world where the population is rising at a fast rate, and it has so many natural resources. Gaddafi argued that Africa is the future, and he argues that in the Green Book. And Minister Louis Farrakhan was very blown away by that. But you should read the section of this book called "Black People Will Prevail in the World." Gaddafi was a great anti-imperialist leader. And, Gaddafi, he actually at one point wanted Libya to join the Warsaw Pact. And he even says that he believes in achieving the ultimate goal of a stateless, classless world of vast abundance, of full communism. So this is a very, very Marxist influenced text. Gaddafi was never a Marxist. He was a Muslim. He believed in God, and, classical Marxism rejects belief in God. And Gaddafi also, he says he does not agree with the concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat. He believes that, you should have a socialist government that rules on behalf of all society. So his socialism was, I guess, more in line with Düring and Friedrich List and the idea of a harmony of interest. He rejected the idea of a class socialism. He wanted to create a socialism for an entire society, right? But largely, if you look at the Marxist governments of the world, that's what they have. Even though they have a proletarian Marxist ideology, they tend to rule in a way that benefits all of society. And especially nowadays, they tend to have a market sector in their economy. And thank you, John. I can start trying to download that now. Hopefully it works this time. Thank you for that link. And I'll start trying to download that as we get through our other super chats that are coming in. Thank you, John. Much appreciated. No, it doesn't like this link. I don't know what's going on. This is downright bizarre, John. It doesn't like this link. It says can't parse this link. I have never seen anything like this, right? The shocking list of items banned from entering Gaza. This is bizarre. All right, I'm going to try to download it elsewhere. Right, I really do want to show this video. It's an important video. Let's see if I can download it. This is absolutely bizarre. Why do all the normal mechanisms that I have for downloading videos not work on this one video about Gaza? Why? All right, hold on. Does it have sound? I think I may have found a way to download it. Does it have sound? Yes, it has sound. All right, I think I found one that'll work. And you know what, John? As soon as that one downloads, if we can get it to download, I think we'll do that one. All right, so let's see if we can get it, because it looks like we got one that works here. Wow, I don't know why. I don't know what in the world made it so this video was not downloading, but it looks okay. So we've got it. Hold on. Is it downloading? All right. Well, hopefully it starts to download here. You know, this is frustrating. Very frustrating. I got it with sound. Okay. Oh, here it is. Here it is. It's downloading. Okay. All right. It's downloading now. All right. Very good. So it looks like I found a way to download it. I don't know why that video is giving me such difficulty, but here it is. Here it is. This is the video about what you cannot bring into Gaza. All right. Here we go. I've got it with sound. So let's see. Let's get it on here. All right.
Chocolate croissants, animal feed, nail clippers, water filters, and solar panels have in common? Well, as well as brutally cutting off electricity, water, and the internet to Gaza, Israel has either denied or restricted access to these items, as well as over 40 other life-saving necessities like generators and oxygen cylinders for hospitals. Look, the chocolate croissants I get, it's been well documented that chocolate croissants are in fact Hamas's weapon of choice. Israel's Iron Dome has literally been overwhelmed in recent weeks by the sheer number of chocolate croissants being launched at it from Gaza. But in all seriousness, if the past 6 months have finally proven anything to the world, it's that the occupation continuously overrides international law because like a spoiled, unsupervised child with rich parents, there are absolutely no consequences.
Israel has blocked the free movement of people and goods in and out of the Gaza Strip for almost 2 decades. Now, Israeli civilians have started their own blockade.
A group of Israeli settlers has blocked trucks transporting humanitarian aid to Gaza. The vehicles were forced to stop at several border crossings. Settlers also destroyed some of the supplies. Aid trucks entering the Strip have been attacked repeatedly.
Family groups with their babes in arms, determined to stop aid that is desperately needed by families in Gaza. Children who survive the bombings may not survive famine. Back in Rafah, aid did not reach 12-year-old Yazan Al-Kafarna.
FYI, blocking humanitarian aid is a total violation of international law. Here's the list of what's been denied entry into Gaza at least once in the past 6 months. Anesthetics, animal feed, cardiac catheters, chemical water testing kits, those terrifying chocolate croissants, flak jackets and helmets for aid workers, green tents and sleeping bag kits, mobile desalination units, oxygen concentrated scalpels and obstetric kits, surgical tools for doctors, HAP stand kits for water distribution, toys, ventilators, and x-ray machines. According to COGAT, that's the Israeli military agency responsible for authorizing the aid that is allowed to go to Palestinians in Gaza, almost all humanitarian supplies are allowed through, so long as they get to inspect it first. Let's not forget that while this Israeli agency is doing this, another Israeli military agency is bombing, shelling, and shooting Palestinians. But here's the thing, according to the UN, if Israel rejects one item during an inspection, the whole aid truck is rejected and sent back. And if, and that's an enormous if, a truck does get into Gaza, Israeli forces get to decide where, when, and how it goes, or doesn't go. And as we've seen from the Zionist dance parties blocking convoys of aid trucks, and the widespread images of famine and emaciated babies and children, a disturbingly small amount is getting through. Before the genocide, at least 500 aid trucks would enter Gaza each day. And that wasn't enough to meet the level of need Israel created through its inhumane 18-year illegal blockade. That's why people from around the world have taken a perfectly legal measure, as called for twice this year by the International Court of Justice, to deliver aid themselves via international waters with the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, aid that is going to be delivered directly to Palestinians in Gaza. To make sure the Freedom Flotilla and the hundreds of international human rights observers that are delivering this aid stay safe and get to Gaza, we need you to keep your eyes on the mission and the pressure up on the streets, at your elected representatives' offices, and on their phones.
Wow. Yeah. Great video, John. I mean, it just shows you the utter inhumanity of what's being done. Peter Coffin actually made a great video calling out Destiny, the clown Destiny that I debated. He defended the blocking of cookies by Israel. And this is a great video Peter Coffin did. So I'm going to put that on as well. But keep the super chats rolling in. I'll answer other questions people have. But I figured it'd be a good time to show Peter Coffin's latest video. Go subscribe to Peter Coffin's channel. He's a member of CPI. He's now a member of our board of directors. He just joined our board of directors. And Peter Coffin is a great member of CPI. And he plugs CPI in this video, actually. So I'm just going to show him responding to Destiny's defense of Israeli genocidal policies.
My name's Peter Coffin, and I hold right here in my hands bomb-making ingredients. So with these little bastards, according to Destiny, political streamer extraordinaire, I am dangerous.
Why would cookies be prevented from going in?
And
what were
potato
custom
chips.
rockets fueled with?
Yeah, with cookies? Yeah,
With sugar and fertilizer.
So Breaking Points, the political podcast's offshoot Counterpoints, hosted a debate between Destiny and Omar Badar, whom I am unfamiliar with, but his Instagram says that he is a progressive political analyst. So anyway, here's the full context of what happened.
What they're currently doing is obviously not defensible, to be devastating the civilian population in order to thin that population, by the words of Israel's leader right now.
When the population has always had a calorie surplus.
Yeah, even the diet part.
Calorie surplus. They literally have. And that's also why Finkelstein got mad, because if you try to say, really, wait, these people are starving? By what metric? You can't find
that's
it
what's so infuriating, Stephen, is that you want to start counting calories and try to discover whether they have a surplus or not, when you're missing the fact that Israel getting to decide what food gets into Gaza is itself outrageous.
Right.
One people does not get to control whether another side gets to have cookies for their children,
and you know
or potato chips or sodas. You don't get to do that. That's a level of dominance and oppression that is unacceptable.
But you're not capable of having it because you won't even admit why the blockade exists.
I'm not there. I'm not going to pretend that I know the situation in Gaza. But I agree with this Omar gentleman's point. They should not have control over the food supply in Gaza. I mean, people in our country hate the idea of our government being in control of our food supply. And this is a tiny little non-imperial nation which another country, backed by the entire West, is in control of their food supply. But Destiny doesn't believe Omar is capable of that conversation because he won't admit that they're going to make missiles out of the cookies.
Why were cookies being prevented from going in?
And
what were custom
chips.
rockets fueled with?
Yeah, with cookies? Yeah.
With sugar and fertilizer. Yes, that's how they made the early rockets. The first generation that was
we're going to deny Palestinians in Gaza sugar because it might be used. Hamas fighters breathe air too. Maybe Israel can restrict air from going into Gaza.
I have a feeling I would get along with Omar. I use arguments like that all the time. Like when people say, you can't agree with anything Ron DeSantis says. I say, well, I agree with him about gravity. Gravity is real. We have to be able to agree with people that we disagree with on things that are clearly real. I'm not saying it's impossible to use fertilizer and sugar to make bombs. I'm not. I'm pretty sure that's possible, but I'm also pretty sure it's not how they're making the bombs. I'm going to let Ryan Grimm, who, by the way, I don't think is like some great guy or anything. He wrote a book like supporting the squad. But when somebody says something right, somebody says something right.
Did you say that Hamas is turning cookies into missiles?
My understanding is that the reason for the restricting of sugar-based products was that the first generation, I think they were called Qassam rockets, were built in really crude shops using combinations of fertilizer and sugars.
Now, just assume that's completely true, that there's nothing wrong with that statement, that it's completely correct. A precision statement that's not oversimplified or exaggerated in any way. Almost all food and drink has sugar in it. And I'm not talking about the fact that the U.S. diet is very sugar heavy. I'm talking about the fact that even when you don't add sugar to food, sugar is naturally occurring in almost everything. Fruits and vegetables have sugar in them naturally. And while you technically can separate sugar from cooked food, it's not practical to do it in the amounts you would need to make bombs, which is piles and piles of refined, granulated sugar. But let's let Ryan Grimm continue that point.
That they would use.
Do you know what the primary component of Hamas explosives is now?
I'm pretty sure now they use more sophisticated stuff, but I don't know. You tell me.
Unexploded Israeli bombs, because they've dropped so many over the last decade.
I doubt that's true. I'm sure they do.
With a 10 to 20% failure rate, Hamas then digs them up. The Yasin 105s that you see, blowing up all these Israeli tanks, primarily fueled by Israeli explosives.
But I doubt the majority of them are.
So I can't tell you with 100% certainty that what Ryan Grimm said right there is completely correct. I can tell you where he got that information, though, from the New York Times reporting it. In this article titled, "Where is Hamas Getting Its Weapons? Increasingly from Israel," The New York Times asserts that the very weapons that Israeli forces have used to enforce a blockade of Gaza are now being used against them. I'll just read this verbatim. Unexploded ordnance is a main source of explosives for Hamas, said Michael Kardash, the former deputy head of the Israeli National Police Bomb Disposal Division and an Israeli police consultant. Yeah, it's pretty hard to get enough sugar out of cookies to make bombs with, but it's pretty easy to get enough bombs out of bombs to make bombs with. This is not a pro-Hamas article, might I add. This article repeatedly talks about Hamas stealing weapons and invading Israeli towns. So if you think this article is pro-Hamas, you're wrong. According to the Middle East Monitor, Israel has dropped 65,000 tons of bombs on Gaza in the last 89 days. To be clear, that's more than 45,000 bombs. Let's just do the math on that real quick. 45,000 times 0.15. That means there is somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,750 unexploded bombs for Hamas to scavenge and repurpose. The most recent figure I was able to find for how many bombs Hamas has dropped on Israel puts it at around 9,000. Also, in terms of death, there is a massive disparity. It's actually kind of hard to get updated death counts, but the Committee to Protect Journalists posted on May 3rd that there have been 34,000 Palestinian deaths in Gaza and 1,200 deaths in Israel. That's just a hair less than 30 times as many deaths in Gaza, which, might we add, is significantly smaller than Israel with a significantly smaller population. And normal people don't look at this war and think, wow, I really think one of these sides is right. Most people don't think that. Most people see it and think, why do they need to be fighting? There should be a two-state solution, yada, yada, world peace. Here's the problem with that, though. Israel, why am I holding this cookie up? I don't need this anymore. The problem with that, though, is that to understand what Israel is makes it obvious why there isn't a two-state solution brewing. Israel is an imperial client state. It exists as an outpost for the U.S. to do all of its oil shit in the Middle East. It's not a grand Jewish conspiracy. They are not in control of us. Israel, I don't think, should be just outwardly regarded as a Jewish state either. It is ethno-nationalist, that's for sure. It also doesn't represent Jewish people. Many, many Jewish people around the world do not support Israel. I am a little bit of that. I have never been like a practicing Jew or anything, and my family isn't culturally Jewish, but in terms of DNA, it's there. And I don't support Israel. I just don't. And it's not because it's Jewish. It's because of the imperial client state thing I said a minute ago. It's a satellite for US/Western imperialism. All the stuff that you don't like about what we do in oil, Israel helps enable that. And they are not in control of us. Many people like to paint them as in control of us. They are not. We are in control of them. And when people say, oh, well, Biden wants them to calm down. Biden wants them to stop doing it. No, he doesn't. No, it's words. It's not actions. We could stop them from doing that shit if we wanted to. We don't have to give them a bunch of money. We don't have to give them a bunch of weapons. But we do those things. Not we, but like the U.S. state. And the reason that we do that is, again, like I said, because Israel as a imperial client state helps preserve our interests in the region. If you don't like when we invade a country for oil, you shouldn't like the fact that we keep Israel as an imperial client state the way we do, because it is pretty important for that. There has always been a conflict because one day Great Britain just plopped Israel there. And everybody who was there, they were like, shoo, get out. Western imperialism needs this plot of land, thank you. No, the Jews. It's the Jews that need it. Not us, not Western imperialism. the Jews need it. It's their holy land. You can't ask questions. It's anti-Semitic if you ask questions. Everybody wants there to be peace. Everybody wants them to stop fighting. Everybody wants Hamas to stop doing bad things, which I'm not going to say that they don't do bad things. It's a war. That's what happens in a war. But in terms of both quantity and effectiveness, Hamas has done significantly less than Israel has. So if the bad things that Hamas has done and is doing are unexcusable, remember, Israel is doing about 30 times more. Ongoing wars become less and less popular. That's just how it works. Because the more people learn about what's going on there, the less they want America spending money continuing it. Now, I'm not saying that if the US government wasn't spending the money in that region on war, they would suddenly start giving us health care and working on infrastructure projects and making our lives better, making our schools better, instituting a jobs program and building America. I'm not saying that would automatically happen. These are the actual problems of the world. If you resolved these, you could stop the fighting. Why? Because the necessity to have Israel operate as a client state in order for us to enforce our will upon the Middle East just evaporates into thin air. Destiny is actually out here saying they're making bombs out of cookies in Palestine, and that's why it's rational to withhold food from them. Oh boy, oh boy.
Destiny, oh destiny, what do you seek? In the depths of Wikipedia, do you find what you need? You argue with precision, armed with facts galore. But in the world outside, can you find something more?
With sugar and fruit and fertilizer, yes.
Searching for the knowledge in the endless sea. Destiny, oh destiny, will you ever find peace? Let go of the articles, set your spirit free. Destiny, oh destiny, embrace what you can't see.
I'm going to take a second to plug the Center for Political Innovation here real quick. It's a real anti-imperialist org that is spending time educating and agitating in that direction. So if you're interested in them, I'll leave a link for them in the description. And honestly, I think that's all I've got for you today. But what do you have for me? All right, there's a whole comment section down there for you to just fill up. Also, lick the buttons down here, slurp all over them, become a subscriber, and don't forget to money me. Go to patreon.com/PeterCoffin right now and money me. If you got some time to kill, my most recent documentaries right here. If you got a little less time to kill, but you want to watch some videos, these are also good. I appreciate all of the time that you've given me. I hope you have a nice day. Bye.
That's Peter. That's Peter. That was his commentary on the whole cookies as weapons thing. But there you go. Have you read Rahanama, the Book of the Spirit? I have not. I don't know what that is. Why some communists believe that market socialism is revisionist, like they claim China is capitalist for having a market sector. Well, why do they think that? You know, at the time that the Soviet Union fell, the leaders of the Soviet Union were largely saying they didn't believe in communism anymore. Right? Gorbachev said that he no longer believed in class struggle. He was striving for universal human values. They started saying that basically all the Marxist ideas were out of date. They started saying things like, you know, in the final years of the Soviet Union, they said that imperialism didn't exist. Gorbachev loved Reagan. He loved Margaret Thatcher. It was pretty clear that a very big section of the Soviet Communist Party didn't believe in communism anymore. So among the global communist movement, there were many people, you know, who argued that the Soviet Union should have stuck with the way Stalin did things, and that, you know, that when Khrushchev came to power, started moving away from the way Stalin did things. That was the beginning of what led to the fall of the Soviet Union. And there's a lot of truth in that, a whole lot of truth in that, mainly because of the fact that Khrushchev's secret speech was so devastating. It was so utterly devastating. You know, I mean, to the Soviet Communist Party, to be told that the man who had led them through all of that was just an evil murderer, etc. And it was done for very opportunistic reasons of wanting to appease the imperialists. China at first embraced the secret speech for a couple of years, and then ultimately, you know, denounced it and called the Soviet Union revisionist because they were trying to hold back the world revolution. And then after about 10 years, China started claiming that the Soviet Union was imperialist. It was another imperialist empire. So, you know, there's a lot of confusion about, you know, what went wrong in the Soviet Union. And there's a school of thought that says, well, they should have just stuck with what was going on during the Stalin years. And well, I used to think that way. And you can probably find old speeches where I say the reason the Soviet Union fell is they deviated from the communist system, etc. Well, it's more complicated than that. And it's taken me years to realize that it's actually more complicated than that, right? The Soviet Union fell because they needed to change, but they had developed a structure that was so rigid that instead of bending, it broke, right? That they, you know, that after you get over that first hurdle of industrialization, you know, you do need the market for things that make life enjoyable. Restaurants, children's toys, clothing, consumer goods. And everyone acknowledges that the Soviet Union was weaker than the West when it came to consumer goods. The Soviet Union, they could make steel very well. They could industrialize. They could even make computers and home computers very, very well. But when it came to things that just make life fun, right? You know, enjoyable, you do need an element of market incentive with that. You need people to be able to vote with their dollars, right? You do need that to some degree or other. And China realized this, and they adjusted their system in a way that could accommodate for that. The Soviet Union kind of started to realize this. At the same time, the bulk of the leadership stopped believing in communism altogether. And as they tried to adjust and have market reforms, it was just the excuse needed for the United States to get in there and, you know, cooperate with the revisionist leaders of the party and tear the whole thing apart. So it wasn't the market reforms that destroyed the Soviet Union. It was the fact that you had a communist party that didn't believe in communism anymore. You had, you know, the Gorbachevs and the Yeltsins and the reformist wing of the party that didn't believe in communism. And you also had a structure that was not very flexible. So, you know, you had a layer of people who got in there who were actively trying to dismantle it. And you had a Soviet, you know, Soviet propaganda, Soviet media was very bland. A lot of people comment on that, right? In the final years of the USSR, nobody believed the state line, right? The propaganda was very, very, it was very watered down. During the Stalin years, because they were invaded by 15 countries after the revolution. Then they had World War II, and you had what was called the Great Terror of 1936 and 37, where there was a big crackdown, and a lot of people. There was, apparently a Nazi conspiracy discovered inside the government. Because of that, there was a message kind of sent to a lot of people that if you talk about communism, like Marxist ideology, you'll get in trouble. Right. And this is something that Brzezinski and a lot of the anti-Soviet strategists point out, is that by the 60s and 70s, the state ideology in the Soviet Union was very, very stale and bland because it wasn't safe to ask questions about it. If you talked about communism, you might talk about it in the wrong way and get in trouble. So there was a very surface level line that people stuck to. The USA is imperialist, capitalism is bad. We want to produce more consumer goods. And they just kind of stuck with that. And beneath the surface, a lot of people didn't believe it. And they were turning to the synthetic left, which was a big part of, the reformist school that came in. Right. And the CIA, I mean, it's now revealed that the CIA and all that funded, reformist ideas and reformist journals and et cetera. And then also you had, especially in the final years of the USSR, you had a rise of like orthodox nationalism. That was also beneath the surface of people that were converting to being Orthodox, that were admirers of Stalin, but they were starting to admire Stalin as if he was a great czar. They were, and the official state ideology of Marxism, Leninism became very stale. And because it was very stale, people were getting their ideology from somewhere else. And this all contributed to a situation where, as they started to implement the market reforms, all of the confusion beneath the surface kind of boiled over, and it took the country apart. Whereas China was able to implement market reforms in a way that didn't tear it apart. Now, it's interesting because the Cultural Revolution in China was very awful. The Chinese Communist Party considers it a big mistake. However, there are some Chinese people who say, look, the Cultural Revolution was awful, but the only way that we could have the market reforms of the 80s without just completely destroying the socialist system was we had to have Mao pound communism into our heads really hard for 10 years first with the Cultural Revolution. And that the market reforms would have led to a counter-revolution if they hadn't had the Cultural Revolution first. And that's an interesting perspective, right? Obviously, the Chinese Communist Party says that if they could do it again, they wouldn't do the Cultural Revolution. But then that raises the questions of, would the market reforms have resulted in tearing apart, socialism, right? But because the Chinese Communist Party had so thoroughly inculcated society with Marxism, they were able to then implement the market reforms. And what a lot of people don't realize, and what people in China point out that they never talk about in Western media because it doesn't match their narrative, is that there was a huge amount of resistance from the population to the market reforms in China. Now, I think the market reforms were ultimately correct, but the population did not think that, because the population were Maoists, and there were armed uprisings when Deng Xiaoping took power. There were a huge amount of strikes, and throughout the 70s and 80s, the population largely, they didn't agree with the party. They didn't agree that market reforms were necessary because they had lived 10 years under the Cultural Revolution, where it was communism was everything, and anything that wasn't communism was completely wiped away. And that, they now have a statue of Confucius in Beijing, but there are protests against it. And there are people who vandalize it because they say it's not communist. And many people argue that in a way, the rural people, especially people in the countryside, are more communist than the people in the cities are. Right. So people who tell you, oh, the people want freedom, but this communist ideology is being imposed on them. No. The Communist Party is much more reformist and market-oriented than the population is, and especially in the rural areas in China. You go to rural areas, it looks like it's still a Cultural Revolution. You go to some of these farms in rural areas, they're wearing their Mao suits, and they got the pictures of Mao, and it looks like it's still the Cultural Revolution, right? So, the way we understand it is completely wrong, but China was able to implement the market reforms in a way that kept the Communist Party in power, that maintained the socialist planned economy. And I have pointed out, and this is one thing that bears pointing out, and this might be a scandalous thing for me to say. I'm sure somebody can twist this into something scandalous. But look, what fascism is on paper, not what it actually is, but what fascism, Mussolini fascism, is on paper, is what China has actually become, right? Fascism, if you read what the fascists actually advocated, they said, we're going to have markets, we're going to have private companies, but we're going to build up this really powerful state that will force everything to be good, that will make sure the market never gets out of control and puts the interests of the whole country ahead of that, right? And fascism was largely an answer to Marxism. Marxism is saying we need a workers' revolution. Fascism is saying, well, no, you don't. We'll just build this really, really popular nationalistic state that will control the economy and take care of the ordinary guy and make sure the economy keeps growing. Well, that's not what fascism actually was, because there was no class struggle, right? There was no, fascism, there was no overturning of capitalist property relations. Yeah, people lie. There's not much you can do about it. But there was no overturning of capitalist property relations. Right. And so fascism was largely just a faction of the ruling class with a big popular state to push its interests and try to stabilize the economy with militarism and degrowth, etc. So fascism was not what it aspired to be. Right. But if you look at what China is today with their proletarian socialist revolution and then the market reforms that came later, they have kind of created a situation where they do have a very big market sector, but they have this very, very big and powerful state that is based upon a well-organized population that comes out of a worker and peasant revolution that controls the market sector and makes sure the economy keeps growing. So in a weird, weird way, only communism could create what the fascists said they aspired to create. And that's a very weird, weird thing. And it's just one of the ironies of history. Fascism never created what it claimed it was going to create. However, communist revolutions have, right? And so anyone, and I'll say this because there continue to be people who watch these streams and all that who have some delusions about fascism or whatever. Ask yourself, why hasn't fascism ever been able to live up to its promises, right? Now they'll tell you communism has never lived up to its promises. I would beg to differ. I would say communism has built Russia and China into superpowers. It's raised countries up out of poverty. It's raised living standards and created societies where you have a rationally planned economy where growth is no longer restrained by the irrationality of capitalism, right? Has communism created heaven on earth? No, but heaven on earth, or the ultimate goal of communism, is only possible with vast abundance, where you completely eliminate all scarcity. And communism has achieved quite a bit along that road. In fact, 75% of all poverty alleviation has happened in China because of the Chinese Communist Party. So I would argue that, if someone is looking at fascism, right, they should ask themselves, why has fascism never been able to achieve this? And why have communists actually achieved societies where, the market is controlled and forced to work in the interest of society overhaul? And the answer is that Marxism is a class ideology. Marxism is struggling against the owners of the means of production, and it's mobilizing the majority of society, the working class, against them. And that class struggle is an essential part of what makes socialist societies able to have market sectors and have growth, right? That scientific socialism is a necessary ingredient in creating a society that overcomes the irrationality of the market, and that no fascist state has ever done that. No fascist state and no social democratic state has ever done that either, right? As long as the imperialists and the big monopolies remain in power, you never ultimately overcome what Marx called the narrow horizon of bourgeois right. You never overcome the fact that those who own the means of production are going to operate those means of production in their interests, right? So this is a weird kind of thing. But at the end of the day, I don't think a market sector is revisionist. I think that there is the ultimate goal of communism, a stateless, classless world. I think that there is capitalism, which is a society where profit is in command, and that between capitalism and socialism, there's going to be many different stages and many different models and many different ways of doing things. And that socialism is constantly changing and adjusting. And that was the problem with the Soviet Union, is they were unable to adjust. But China has constantly been adjusting and correcting its socialist system. And that socialism, as it emerges to become a global system, will be constantly changing and adjusting to be more efficient, to utilize people's strengths in more ways. And there will be a mixture of state corporations and state enterprises, cooperative enterprises, private individual enterprises, major for-profit corporations that are managed and controlled and regulated by the state, have party factions within them. There will be different forms of property within a socialist society, but in a socialist society, the means of production, the centers of economic power, are forced to work in the interest of society overall, not for the profits of the wealthy few. And that there is a state that is in the hands of the revolutionary working class that controls the means of production, though they may be private, they may be cooperative, or they may be state-owned. So I hope that that's helpful in answering that question. The supreme leader of Iran has done more to protect Middle Eastern Christians than Trump, Biden, Kennedy, or Gabbard put together. Yes, and I would argue that also Qasem Soleimani, right? No one killed more ISIS terrorists than Qasem Soleimani, and that it is the USA and its fomenting of Wahhabi extremism in Libya and Syria to try and bring down secular governments that was spreading Wahhabi extremism that resulted in many Christians being killed. The Christians in Syria, the Christians in Libya, the Christians in these countries are the biggest supporters of the governments that the USA was trying to destabilize and overthrow. And of course, that's never pointed out. I will tell you that right, in the summer when Donald Trump got elected, the 2016 summer, I went to the White House and I covered a big rally by Egyptian Coptic Christians. And they were rallying to support Donald Trump. And that confused people. I think the cameraman who went with me to cover that rally was like, why are all these brown people supporting Trump? This doesn't make sense. And I said, well, they live in Egypt. And in Egypt, there's this vile extremist group called the Muslim Brotherhood. And since the Egyptian revolution and the overthrow of Hosni Mubarak, the Muslim Brotherhood that murders and persecutes Christians has been running rampant. And Barack Hussein Obama, because he has an agenda of trying to destabilize the Middle East, he funds and backs and arms the Muslim Brotherhood. And so these Egyptian Coptic Christians are saying they want Trump because Trump is accusing Obama of being tied to Muslim terrorist groups, and they believe that Donald Trump will help protect them from the Muslim Brotherhood, right? And this was something that, again, if you don't understand the dynamics of the region, right? People have a very simplistic understanding of these things. In America, yes, there's a lot of right-wing conservatives who hate them Muslims, and they want all them Muslims to go to some other country. They're all a bunch of terrorists. That's why I support Israel, because they're killing them Muslims. Israel's in the Bible. But that's not the global situation, right? And that's not how these things work globally, okay? And globally, there are many, many Christians who live in Muslim countries who get the protection of the Islamic Republic of Iran or the Syrian Arab Republic or the Libyan leader Gaddafi. And they're not afraid of Muslims because the overwhelming majority of the people in their country are Muslims. They're afraid of Wahhabis. Wahhabis are a faction of Muslims that want to violently kill them. And they're also afraid of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a crazy extremist group that engages in violence against Christians. And so secular nationalist governments are their source of protection. And Barack Obama was working with the Wahhabi Saudis and the Muslim Brotherhood funded by Turkey and Qatar to overthrow these. In fact, since the war on terror began, every government except for the Taliban in Afghanistan that the USA has actually overthrown has been a secular government that fights against Islamic extremism. Saddam Hussein was a secular leader who fought against Islamic extremism, right? Gaddafi was a secular leader who fought against Islamic extremism. The USA wasn't successful, but they tried to overthrow Bashar Assad, a secular leader who fought against Islamic extremism, right? And the USA, instead of fighting terrorism, has been fighting against the enemies of the terrorists, right? And that has led to a huge amount of persecution of Christians in the Middle East. So, and Iran is an ally of Syria. Iran, has sent its forces into Iraq to help protect Iraqi Shia and Iraqi Christians from the Wahhabis in Iraq. So this is what people must understand. So, yeah. Exactly. And I wish people could understand this, right? And that the policies of Barack Hussein Obama, which started under George W. Bush, which kind of continued under Trump, not as vigorously. There was some pushback against them under Trump, but they still largely continued, were policies that endangered Christians in the Middle East. And Russia and Iran. I went to church in Iran on Sunday morning at Armenian Christian Church. Christians in Iran are treated way better than Muslims are treated in America. I'll just tell you that much, right? In America, Muslims get called terrorists. The FBI raids their homes, etc. But in Iran, the Christians, they do their thing, and they even have a big wall around the church. And inside of the church, women don't have to wear headscarves, and you can drink alcohol. You can drink communion wine, and all the Islamic laws don't even apply. They have a special place. Could you imagine that? We said in America, you know what? If you want to build a mosque, we'll build a wall around it, and you don't have to follow the American laws. We would never do that. That's what Iran does for Christians. In Iran, they build a wall around the church, and all of the laws of Iran that are religious in nature don't apply inside. Can you imagine that? That's how much Iran protects Christians. The one thing that they will not tolerate in Iran on the part of Christians or Jews or Muslims or anybody else is supporting Israel, because Israel's their enemy, and Israel wants to wipe them off the map, and Israel has hundreds of nuclear weapons and wants to murder them. But if you're not supporting Israel and you're a Christian in Iran, they build a big wall around this area, and you can go in and you can drink alcohol, and women cannot wear headscarves, and there you go. Bet you didn't know that. But that's why you're here watching these streams. You learn these things. Brooklyn money. All right. What does that mean? I don't know. Brooklyn is an expensive place to live, right? But there you go. Yeah. Hey, got to do what you got to do, All right. And we showed the flotilla video and Peter's video as well. Thank you for staying on top of that, John. Is the USA likely to start a conflict in Taiwan? Well, they're doing everything they can to provoke a conflict in Taiwan. They're dumping weapons. They keep, doing everything they can to create a situation. They're trying to create a situation where China will feel that it has to respond, and then they can use that to demonize China, like what they're doing with Ukraine. With Ukraine, Russia held off, and it held off, and it held off, and it got to the point that they couldn't hold off any longer. And then they said, oh, look, Russia's being brutal. Russia's being an aggressor. And, and I hope that China doesn't take the bait. I hope that there's a de-escalation, right? Taiwan is China. It's called the Republic of China. And I believe they will eventually reunify slowly. They will economically bond together, and eventually they will reunify. And that would be the ideal situation for the whole world, right? That the government on Taiwan and the government on the mainland just gradually reunify into one country. But the USA would like to provoke a situation where China, sends the mainland government in China, sends the military to retake Taiwan. That's not a good situation. A lot of Chinese people would die, right? People on Taiwan would die, and people on the Chinese mainland would die. The military sent in, and that would be a bad situation, and it wouldn't be good for China, and it wouldn't be good for anybody, right? So ultimately, yeah, there you go. There you go. One of my friends wants to discuss Strasserism, and I don't know much about it. Can you give me a crash course on the basics so I can start the material? Yeah, I did a video on it, but I'll explain it. It's like so unbelievable. I did a video explaining what Strasserism was, and I kid you not, one of these people who hates me screenshotted that and sent it to somebody like, oh, Caleb's become a Strasserist. And it's like, that's how dishonest these people are, and they never stop and all of that. So there were the Nazi Party when it started. So let's back up. All right. 1918 in Germany, as World War I was ending, there was a socialist uprising, right? And the government of Germany collapsed, and the Social Democratic Party and the Independent Social Democratic Party and various Marxist groups took power in Germany. And then there was a big debate about whether or not they should write a socialist constitution or whether they should write a capitalist constitution and just try to implement socialism gradually through the electoral process. Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht and the Spartacus Bund, they wanted to create a socialist government, and they were brutally murdered. And Bavaria, the region of Bavaria, was seized by revolutionary socialists who wanted to create a socialist government. They even declared it the Bavarian Soviet Republic. And it, was temporary. They called it Red Bavaria, is more commonly what it was called, but its official name was the Bavarian Soviet Republic. And as Germany, lost World War I, it was stripped of its colonies, it was losing everything. There was a big Marxist uprising in the country. The main Marxist faction was sellout Social Democrats, and they just wrote a capitalist constitution, which became the Weimar Republic. But there were radical factions, such as Rosa Luxemburg and the Spartacus Bund, as well as the Bavarian, Soviet Republic, or Red Bavaria, that tried to have full socialism. So, in order to defeat the socialist uprising, the mainstream Social Democrats, they formed what they called the Freikorps, which were the free officers. And they were right-wing soldiers who were very anti-communist and anti-Marxist, but they were willing to help defend the Social Democratic Weimar Republic against full communist revolution. And so there were various bands of veterans of World War I who were very anti-communist, who formed little militias, and they went out and they overthrew the Soviet Republic of Bavaria. They killed Rosa Luxemburg, and they were just these militias of right-wing veterans of World War I that were very anti-communist. After the Weimar Constitution was signed into existence, you had a very big communist party that emerged in Germany. And then you had various groups that existed that were right-wing armed factions that were against the Communist Party. And they believed all kinds of different things, right? And there were many, many different groups that had many different beliefs. And, you know, the Nazi Party started out as the German Workers' Party, right, which was one of the groups. And it was just called, it was a bunch of veterans, and it was very small. And it was a group of veterans who went around beating up communists and were trying to stop a communist revolution. And they called themselves the German Workers' Party. And then Hitler joined them and took them over. And at the time that he joined them and took them over, he was a police informant. He was a homeless veteran who was getting paid to be a police informant. And he took them over. And then he like adopted some ideas and eventually formed the Nazi Party. Now, as the 1930s kept going, all these various like right-wing anti-communist street fighting groups adopted different, you know, they all started merging into the Nazi Party, but they all had different beliefs. And basically they all, what did they all believe? They all believed communists were the main danger, right? Somehow, right? You know, some of them communists were the main danger because they're, I mean, for various reasons but at the time you have to remember people were literally starving on the streets. Okay. The economy had collapsed. So saying that free market capitalism was the answer wasn't going to cut it, right? People are starving on the streets. People needed jobs. They needed education. So these groups had to have an answer, right? You're saying, well, communists are the main danger. Communists want to provide us all with jobs and healthcare. Why should we join you? And they would say, well, communists are actually agents of the evil Soviet Union. They're agents of Russia. They're part of this global Jewish banking conspiracy. We will give you jobs and healthcare education, but we're National Socialists, right? Or we're Prussian socialists, or we're, you know, and there were a million different versions of this, right, that existed. It was a way to be against the official Soviet-aligned German Communist Party, be against the reformist Social Democrats that ran the government, and seem revolutionary. But the main thing was they went around beating up and murdering communists. They were armed groups that went around killing communists. And there were many different factions among them. And they all eventually started merging into the Nazi Party. And the Nazi Party was being funded by the British. And that's pretty well documented. The British were very afraid of the German Communist Party coming to power, right? So they funded various armed groups that were against the German Communist Party. And this is in chapter 3 of Where is America Going? I talk about this in great detail. And they formed what you can call counter gangs, which were groups that seemed very revolutionary in their essence, but they were actually fighting against the German Revolution. Revolutionary movements to defend capitalism. And Hitler actually, I quote in Where is America Going? Hitler actually explained, he said, why has the German government never been able to defeat communism? Because they've always fought communism on the basis of the status quo, and that people turn to communism because they want a revolutionary movement. So we need to form a revolutionary movement that's against communism, right? That was Hitler's innovation or whatever. And he admits that in Mein Kampf. And I quote that in this book. I quote talking about that being where it came from. So Strasserism, Gregor Strasser and his brother Otto Strasser were two guys who ran street fighting groups that fought against communists. And I believe that the name of their street fighting group was like, I think it was called the Iron Front or the Black Front or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was called. But they believed in, well, no, they weren't Nazbols. And I'll tell you who the Nazbols were in a second, because that's kind of relevant to this conversation also. You know, and they had this group they called like the Iron Front, the Red Front, but they merged into the Nazi Party. But as you know, as the Nazi Party was growing and as it was getting bigger, and as the crisis in Germany got worse, 1929, you had the what they call Blut May, or the Bloody May in Wedding, which is a district in Germany. You had like a region of Berlin that was seized for several days by the communists, an armed uprising, and it looked like the communists might be able to take power. You know, so early 1930s, late 1920s, the Nazi Party actually starts changing because they realized they might actually be able to become the government, right? That for a long time they had been funded by the British as this group of street fighting thugs, and they said a lot of things when they were street fighting thugs that were necessary in building their group. And one of the things they had to say was, well, we're going to build what they called National Socialism, right? Well, the communists are traitors. They're loyal to Russia or whatever. We're going to build a German socialism. It's loyal to the German people and is not, and it's the Jews that are blah, 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 whatever, right? And there were a variety of different things floating around. There was a guy named Ernst Juncker, who developed this concept of Prussian socialism. It was like a military socialism of German society, right? And then, and there had been Düring, right? There'd been Düring, Eugen Düring had his, he was against Marxism. He was for a harmony of interests. And there were a variety of different anti-Marxist forms of socialism that had existed. And the main thing was that a lot of these guys were cultural conservatives, right? That they, Marxism was associated with secularism. Marxism was associated with, liberal ways of being, free love, etc. Well, under Stalin, that changed. Stalin started changing that in the Soviet Union, but it didn't change the fact that Marxism was very much considered a liberal bohemian trend. And a lot of these people were very, very culturally conservative, and they were very military, right? Military oriented. And, these are people in the military who are very culturally conservative. And the idea communists just repelled them because they were very liberal, they were secular, they were, free love or hippies or whatever. So, so you had these various groups that went around murdering and beating up communists, and they had their various ideologies. They all started merging into the Nazi Party. Well, the Nazi Party, Hitler starts to realize like he could actually become the leader, and he meets with Hjalmar Schacht, who was this wealthy German banker, and Hjalmar Schacht takes him around to the other bankers and says, this is our guy. So Hitler starts changing what the Nazis believe. And so Hitler starts saying things like National Socialism, which is the ideology of the Nazi Party. They're the National Socialist German Workers' Party. National Socialism just means doing what's best for the country, and that as long as capitalists are patriotic, as long as capitalists are patriotic, their property won't be nationalized. And Hitler starts basically saying the socialism part of National Socialism, we don't believe in that anymore. And Otto Strasser and Gregor Strasser and others are like, wait a second, because they had built this fanatical street fighting group, and their message had been, well, the communists are phonies. We're the real communists. We're the real socialists. And Marxism and Marxist communism is a conspiracy by Russia, or it's a conspiracy by the Jews. But we have real, authentic German National Socialism, whatever, right? And so Hitler's coming into power, and he's saying, well, don't worry about socialism. We don't really believe in socialism anymore. It's just National Socialism just means that as long as companies are working in the interest of the nation overall, it's fine. So Gregor Strasser writes a lot of articles debating Hitler. And I believe Hitler and Gregor Strasser had a number of like letters that they wrote to each other about what it means, what does Nazism mean? And Hitler is saying Nazism just means being loyal to the nation, and the socialism part we don't really believe in anymore. And Gregor Strasser is saying, well, no, we have to be against capitalism, whatever, right? Well, Hitler won, and Gregor Strasser, he lost out, right? But Gregor Strasser was still in the Nazi Party, and he was still a really important guy in their street fighting organizations. And what's interesting is if you read The Mass Psychology of Fascism by Wilhelm Reich, the weird sex psychologist, he really admired Gregor Strasser. And he begins by talking about how great Gregor Strasser is, and that Gregor Strasser is such a an articulate speaker and an intellectual. And it's like, it's a little weird. Wilhelm Reich loves Gregor Strasser. But anyway, so Strasser and all of them, but Strasser's a leader of this street fighting group called the Stormtroopers, right? And it's this group of Nazi thugs and murderers that go around killing communists. So after Hitler comes to power, one of the first things he does is he makes the Stormtroopers an official police unit. They're like deputized, right? They're no longer illegal street fighters. They're suddenly an official wing of the police. And those guys go nuts, right? And they, they start murdering people on the street and burning synagogues, and they're all of a sudden they've got badges, right? These racist thugs, these anti-communist street fighters, they're officially designated. So they're the stormtroopers. So they start murdering people, and there's just like blood and chaos on the streets as this wing of the Nazi government, as this street fighting group is there. Well, after a while, some of them start saying, when is Hitler actually going to deliver, right? Hitler's not actually nationalizing anything. He's not actually, creating any economic socialism. And also Hitler is looking at them and he's saying, these guys, if they keep this up, I'm going to be removed from power because these guys are just creating utter chaos. And I have to show that I can stabilize the country and bring in the new order. So the Nazis had what they called the Night of the Long Knives. And the Night of the Long Knives was a night where all the leaders of the stormtroopers were arrested and executed. Like they were just rounded up and killed. And the main leader of the stormtroopers was Ernst Rem, who was gay. And he was openly gay. And they found him in bed with another man. They arrested him. And I guess the story officially is that he committed suicide, that they locked him in a room with a loaded gun and said, you can do it yourself. I don't know. I don't know if that's actually what happened. But they could have just shot him and said that. But regardless, Ernst Rem died, and so did Gregor Strasser. I guess they locked him in a cell with a gun and he shot himself, or I don't know. He ended up dead. And there was a number of Nazi leaders who were killed on the Night of the Long Knives. So, and then after that, Hitler dissolved the stormtrooper street fighting group and he formed the SS, which was a secret police force, right? So the stormtroopers were abolished and they were replaced with the SS. So Otto Strasser, Gregor Strasser's brother, fled Germany to Britain. And then as World War II got going, the British Empire found Otto Strasser and they said, hey, you could be a useful propaganda tool. So they gave him a radio show and they published his books and they airdropped them into Germany and they blasted into Germany the speeches of Otto Strasser. And Otto Strasser said, I'm the real Nazi. Hitler's a big sellout and a big phony, and Hitler's actually a Jew, and that I'm the true Nazi, and I believe in National Socialism, and Hitler is actually an agent of the Russians because he signed the non-aggression pact with the Russians, and he's actually a Jew, and he was the Nazi Trotsky. That's what I call Otto Strasser. Gregor Strasser's brother became the Nazi Trotsky, and that was part of the British psychological operations during World War II, is they had this Nazi who got on the wrong side of Hitler, who fled the country and moved to England, and they let him be, a big central part of British propaganda against the Nazis. Then after World War II, Gregor Strasser moved back to Germany, and because he didn't like Hitler, and because Hitler had executed his brother, he was allowed to have a party. And so in the 50s and 60s, he was one of the only people who had been a Nazi who was allowed to openly go around talking about being a Nazi because he hated Hitler. And he had his own political party in Germany called the Black Front or something like that. And he was just a guy in Germany. And he had the Black Front Party or something like that. And it was a small fascist group that said Hitler was a big sellout. That's what Strasserism is. Now, what's interesting is Nazis generally accuse each other of being Strasserists. That's a really common thing that Nazis will do, right? And, American Nazis, generally, they consider communism to be their greatest enemy. George Lincoln Rockwell, the founder of the American Nazi Party, any speech he ever gives is all about he hates communists, and communists are behind the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King, and communists are all Jews, and they're, the Jews control communism. Nazism, fascism, white supremacy in America is very, very much centered on hating communists. That's a big thing that they're about. However, every so often you get people within that movement, like, what's his name? The guy who wrote Imperium. right? I can't remember his name. I can't remember his name. There was a guy, some guy who wrote a book called Imperium. Francis Parker Yockey, right? You get Francis Parker Yockey, or you get William Luther Pierce. These guys must be into their three names. I don't know what this is. George Lincoln Rockwell, William Luther Pierce, right? Francis Parker Yockey. I don't know why they're into their three names, but you get a three-name guy. I'm joking, but you get somebody that's actually somewhat of an intellectual Nazi, right? Who like takes their ideology seriously, and will come to conclusions like that, that will say things like Francis Parker Yockey is a very strange case. The more you look into that, Francis Parker Yockey is a very strange case. This was an American fascist, who after World War II, he was kicked out of the U.S. Army because he was always saying pro-Nazi things. He was a lawyer. He worked on the Nuremberg trials, but he was actually using that to build a network of former Nazis. And then after World War II, he came to the conclusion that American capitalism was the main danger. And he really liked Abdel Nasser, the Arab socialist leader, because he was talking against Israel. So he went to Egypt and started writing, propaganda for the Egyptian government that was Soviet aligned. And he went and visited Fidel Castro after Fidel Castro came to power. And he ghost wrote a Joe McCarthy speech. He was just this weird guy who was a Nazi it looks like he pivoted toward, becoming a Soviet sympathizer. Right. And then he was caught with fake passports and he committed suicide. He took a cyanide pill in prison after he was caught in the early 60s. And it looks like this was some kind of weird renegade Nazi who was, and he did write a book, a very long book explaining his fascist views, which are actually not very much based on the ideology of Hitler. They're actually more based on the ideology of the German far-right thinker Oswald Spengler, right? He's more of a Spenglerian than a Hitlerite, right? He very much is a Spenglerian conservative, and Francis Parker Yockey formed his own, he had his own little secret network of Nazis who were starting to think the Soviet Union were the good guys in World War II. And whenever people like that emerge, the response among Nazis is to say, well, they're Strasserites, right? And, among Nazis, this is the thing. And actually, this is kind of an interesting thing. I was someplace one time. Anyway, I'm not going to go into detail, but let me just say, I from what I have heard, Nazis, we're not talking about anti-Semites, we're not talking about racists, we're talking actual Nazis, people that admire Hitler. It is usually some kind of very, very bizarre mental illness, okay, where they actually do worship an individual named Hitler. It's not ideological, and the racism goes with it, and ultra masculinity goes with it, but it's largely just these are incels. These are guys who feel that their masculinity is in question. And they see Hitler as a military dictator, a guy who screamed and yelled and gave fiery speeches. And so they see worshiping Hitler and becoming Hitler admirers as a way of trying to get their masculinity back. Right. And it's really usually an unhealthy thing. And they often are people that have deep psychological problems. Okay. There's no way around that. Right. And you said homoeroticism. That's between them and their shrink. But they're people with deep psychological problems. Right. There are white supremacist gangs in prisons that are just white supremacist gangs. There are far-right movements, the John Birch Society, etc. But we're talking actual Nazis, people that think Hitler was good. Those kind of people. It's generally a mental illness, right? It's that they think that they are trying to gain. They see Hitler as the symbol of masculinity. They're incels. They don't have a girlfriend. They got bullied a lot. They got picked on. They're adult men that are having kind of a midlife crisis. They feel like their masculinity is in question. They had an ugly divorce. whatever, right? Or maybe they're gay and they're dealing with their inner sexuality. I don't know what it is, okay? But for some reason, it's largely men with lots of psychological problems, white males that have lots of psychological problems, and they see Hitler as a way of being masculine, right? And for them, it is not about racism. I mean, they are racist. It's not about, anti-Semitism. They are anti-Semitic. For them, it is largely just they worship an individual named Hitler who they see as ultra-masculine. And for them, right, Strasser was against Hitler. So being a Strasserist is like the worst thing you can ever be, right? Because it was against Hitler. For them, it is largely just worshiping Hitler. So every so often you get an outlier among the Nazi groups who emerge. Look, I have to know about these things, right? I study extremist politics. I study political movements. These are things I need to know about, right? And I should read these books and be able to tell you this so you don't have to, right? I study all political movements. I study history and ideology. I should know about these things. And largely Nazi groups tend to be made up of mentally ill men who worship Hitler. Right. That's not white supremacist prison gangs. That's different. That's you're in prison and you're fighting against the other race in prison. That's a different thing. But actual people who wear swastikas, those kind of people, neo-Nazi kind of people, it is they worship Hitler. So every so often you get a weirdo among them who comes along and actually studies Nazi ideology in depth, studies far-right ideology in depth, and gets more of an intellectual take on things, right? You get a Francis Parker Yockey, or there was this guy named William Luther Pierce, and they start to come to conclusions that kind of offend the right-wing sensibilities of Nazis, right? And they start to say things like, well, they hate Jews generally, so they oppose Israel. And then they notice that it's all the communist governments that are supporting the Palestinians. And they'll start to come up with weird conclusions. And what's interesting is, and specifically in regards to North Korea, I am convinced the American government has funded these people because North Korea is not a racist country. There are thousands of Black Africans who live in North Korea. There are thousands of Palestinians who live in North Korea. North Korea has built the monument to independence, right? The monument to independence of Senegal, right? So North Korea, right? North Korea is not a racist country. North Korea supported the Black Panthers and welcomed them as heroes to the country. North Korea is not a racist country. But there has been a huge effort by U.S. media to portray North Korea as a Korean supremacist country, right? I mean, this is the monument that North Korea built to the African country of Senegal's independence, right? They sponsor African students. Exactly. I mean, North Korea is not a racial supremacist society. However, I have noticed that there's a book that was published, an anti-North Korea propaganda book called The Cleanest Race, that tries to say that they're, they think Koreans are the greatest and that everyone else is dirty. And that's not true, right? In addition to that, that Christopher Hitchens, he went to North Korea and he always talks about, when I went to North Korea, I met Koreans who were very angry to see interracial children, very angry to see that in South Korea there were Korean women that had married Black men. Well, that's because the Black men they married were U.S. troops. It has nothing to do with them being Black, but he's like, see, they're mad about mixed racial babies. They must be Nazi. Well, no, they're not. That's not what it's about. It's about the fact that these are U.S. troops that are occupying their country. It's not about them being Black. And there's a book, The Cleanest Race. And, there's all of this stuff trying to convince people that North Korea is somehow an ethno-state, which it is not. North Korea is not an ethno-state. Okay. And I mean, the amount of solidarity that they've done, the thousands of Africans who live in North Korea, the thousands of Arabs who live in North Korea, right? It's just not that. However, there was a layer of Nazis who think that. And those people have gotten a lot of attention, right? And that they have made efforts to infiltrate the Korean Friendship Association, and that it's weird. At the same time, you have, mainstream anti-North Korean propaganda saying that there's a layer of Nazis who think North Korea is an ethno-state. And so you get people that are in the Nazi milieu who are a little bit too smart to be Nazis. So they start trying to make sense of things beyond just the Hitler worship. And they start coming to conclusions that are different, right? And among those people generally get accused of being Strausserists, right? So that's how the term is generally used nowadays, right? They kick them out of whatever Nazi group they're in, and the allegation is you're a Strausserist, or that you're just a communist, right? And I believe the man who killed George Lincoln Rockwell, the man who shot him, was a Nazi who'd been accused of being a Strausserist. George Lincoln Rockwell, the founder of the American Nazi Party, he was killed, he was murdered. And the man who murdered him was a guy who'd been kicked out of the Nazi Party for allegedly trying to insert Marxist propaganda into their publications. He'd been criticizing capitalism too much or whatever. So he got mad and then he shot George Lincoln Rockwell. And that guy, I believe, had been called a Strausserist. And he was somebody who was a little bit too smart, because being a Nazi, right? Let's just be real about this, right? It's one thing to be a racist in America. Plenty of that to go around, right? Plenty of people in America that are racist. It's one thing to be a white supremacist or an anti-Semite in America. But to actually be a Nazi in America doesn't make any fucking sense. I mean, we all can agree it's reprehensible, obviously, right? So don't misinterpret what I'm saying, but it's also retarded. I mean, forgive my colorful language there. It's also retarded. Like Hitler was the leader of a country on the other side of the planet 100 years ago. So why the hell would you be a Nazi in America? It makes no fucking sense. Nazism was not meant to be a universal ideology, right? I mean, it's one, it doesn't make any fucking sense. Nazism was never supposed to be universal. It was a specifically German ideology for Germany in a specific time. So, even if you are far right, even if you are anti-Semitic, even if you are all of these things, being a fucking Nazi doesn't make any sense. It's retarded. However, among people that get into that current, you occasionally get one who's a little bit too intelligent. And that's what I think Strausserism is at this point. It is a label that gets thrown on Nazis that are too fucking smart to be Nazis. And it's sad because you feel like on some level, if someone's in the Nazi milieu, but they're actually smart enough to ideologically dig into it and realize this doesn't make any fucking sense, right? Hey, there you go. Look, the reason I know so much about this is because almost immediately when these streams started, I got accused of being a Strausserist, and I didn't know what a Strausserist was. So I started reading about this stuff, and I've done a fair amount of research, and now I know. So I've done a lot of research and reading into what Strausserism actually is. Because people have been calling me that for years, even though I'm not a racist, even though I'm in favor of immigrant rights and I'm against a crackdown on immigrants, even though, I'm clearly not. But, because people have been calling me that, I have looked into this kind of thing. And that there are a number of, what do you call them? There are occasionally you get a smart person in the far right circles who starts piecing together something that's a little bit more ideologically coherent than Hitler worship, right? Which is most Nazism in America is just incel Hitler worship, right? It's just incel Hitler worship. And you get somebody who starts out as an incel Hitler worshiper, and they start to actually figure out that this doesn't make any goddamn sense. And they start to get a little bit deeper. And then all the other Nazis go, oh my God, he must be a Strausserist. He's against, and then that's generally what happens. All right. Sorry. That was a long answer, but I find political ideology and political theory to be very interesting. So there you go. Russia's goal in Ukraine is now clear, with China signing agreements with Hungary and Serbia. Russia will take Carpathian region of Ukraine to connect Russia and China, which will include. I'm not sure of that, Enoch. At this point, I heard the Russians say at the UN that their operation is at this point been successful. Ukraine is disarmed. The only weapons they have coming in have come from the West, and their military is completely depleted. Russia is ready to sign a peace agreement. It's the United States that's prolonging this. I don't think Russia has a big aspiration to do something like that. I don't think that's the case at all. I think you're dead wrong there, my friend. Right? I think that Russia would very much, like to end this conflict. The idea that they want to march into Kiev and then they're going to march into Paris, that's bullshit. Right? And that's bullshit. It's been promoted in Western media, right? Oh, that's why we have to keep funding. That's why we have to keep funding the war, because Putin's going to take over all the NATO countries. Bullshit. Russia didn't even want to go into Ukraine, and they held off for years and years and years. They did everything they could to avoid going into Ukraine. So no, I think you're dead wrong, Enoch. You are dead wrong. That's not going to happen. Not going to happen. Have you ever been to Brighton Beach? I have, Gleb. When I first moved to New York, I had a job out in Brighton Beach. It wasn't a long job. It was a temporary job. But I went to Brighton Beach all the time for my job. And I saw the Russian language signs. And, I have been out there before. Coney Island and Brighton Beach still to this day are very, very Russian. It's a lot of Russian people out there, a lot of Russian businesses, a lot of Russian stores, etc. There was a friend of mine I was talking to a long time ago. She was, thinking to move to New York. I said, if you speak Russian fluently, you could very easily get a job in Brighton Beach, because they need people like that, right? There's a lot of it, she was, a beautiful young woman. I said, if you wanted to get a job, you could immediately get hired in Brighton Beach. Any store in Brighton Beach would hire you because you speak English fluently and you speak Russian fluently and you're beautiful, right? So you could very easily get a job. She never decided to, go after that opportunity. But I said, look, go out to those neighborhoods, there is a high demand for people who can speak both languages in those neighborhoods. They're very high demand for it. So there you go. There you go. In those neighborhoods, you go back many, many years. One of the stories that I heard years ago was that the Black Panthers, when the Black Panthers, so the Black Panthers originated as kind of a Maoist group, right? They came out of the RAMs, the Revolutionary Action Movement. They started doing their armed patrols. And almost as soon as they launched, the Communist Party denounced them, and they said this is police left adventurism, provocateurs, etc. But around 1969, after Nixon got elected, the Black Panthers did a pro-Soviet pivot, and they began, they aligned with the Communist Party USA, and they formed the United Front Against Fascism organization. And they argued that Richard Nixon was a fascist, and they aligned with the CPUSA. And that's when Angela Davis, who was in the Communist Party, she started giving them classes, and that led to the whole situation. And the Black Panthers took their pivot towards CPUSA in 1969 because Richard Nixon was looking to crush them. J. Edgar Hoover was crushing them. Ramsey Clark, who had been, I used to work for Ramsey Clark, right? So I can attest to this. If anyone knows this, I do. Ramsey Clark, who was the Attorney General under Lyndon Johnson, was trying to hold off the Black Panthers, or trying to hold off the FBI. The FBI was doing all kinds of things without the permission of the Attorney General. There's actually an audio recording that I've posted on here of Ramsey Clark, talking about how, he was trying to stop J. Edgar Hoover from wiretapping people, etc. But, after Richard Nixon got elected, Richard Nixon said the first thing he would do is fire Ramsey Clark. He fired Ramsey Clark. And I believe, what was it? Who was the Attorney General under Nixon? I can't remember, Mitchell, right? Was it Jay Mitchell or something like that? The new Attorney General under Nixon came in and just told the FBI to just go to town after the Black Panthers. But Nixon was wildly unpopular, with the left, right? I mean, the socialists, the leftists opposed Richard Nixon. So the Black Panthers pivoted into an alliance with the Communist Party USA. They had been Maoist oriented before that, but they pivoted towards CPUSA in 1969 after Fred Hampton was killed. Well, Fred Hampton was killed late in that year. They pivoted towards supporting the Communist Party USA. And when they did that, all of a sudden, all these old women from Brighton Beach started coming to all their rallies in New York City. And that it looked very, very weird. You'd have young Black Panthers and young Black people in leather jackets and all of that. And then you'd have a bunch of grandmas from Brighton Beach, babushkas, as they call it, from Brighton Beach with, the scarf over their heads and, walkers and stuff. And a lot of them did not speak English. And there'd be hundreds of them, right? Hundreds of these like old grandmothers from Brighton Beach. And they, that would be holding signs supporting the Black Panthers. Well, they were Russian-speaking people who were Communist Party members, and that a lot of the CPUSA, even in the 60s, was Russian-speaking in New York City, right? They were, that's actually fascinating to me. It's not like that now, but at one point in the 1930s, 1920s and 30s, and even up into the 50s and 60s, right? The Communist Party USA, they had a big layer of people who didn't speak English, right? I'm getting my Russian wrong. I don't speak Russian, so right. But all right. But anyway, they didn't, you got a big layer of people who were just Russian speaking people who were loyal to their homeland. And, you had a Brighton Beach club of the Communist Party that had hundreds of members who were Russian speaking people, and a lot of them very old. And, they were whatever, they were there. And, that existed, right? Today, I know that there is a layer of people in Brighton Beach and Coney Island who like Putin. Not all of them, not a lot, right? And that I know in a lot around the United States, in a lot of the Russian community centers, they just have a rule: they don't talk about the war in Ukraine, right? A lot of the Russian community centers, Russian cultural centers that exist, in order to exist, they just kind of have to be neutral, right? They just have to be neutral. They're like, we promote Russian dancing. We have Russian language classes. We don't talk about Ukraine. We don't talk about Putin. However, I believe that the number of people there that do think Russia is right in Ukraine is probably much higher than you would expect. But the thing that you need to understand is that it's very dangerous, right? And it's one thing, I'm a white dude. I'm a white American guy. No one in my family's Russian, right? My family comes from Ireland like 200 years ago on both sides, whatever. For me to say what I'm saying, that's one thing. But if someone's got a green card as a Russian citizen and they got a green card, they don't have U.S. citizenship, and they start going around saying Putin's right in Ukraine, they could get deported, right? And I mean, officially, and this is interesting, when you apply to be a U.S. citizen, one of the questions is, are you a member of the Communist Party? Now, obviously, Russia is no longer run by the Communist Party. So that question doesn't serve the same purpose. However, right, I think the American government very much, it doesn't want Russians here who like Putin. That's pretty clear. So for immigrant communities, right, it is for them to come out and take political stances is very hard. And I mean, this applies to other ethnic communities as well, right? Other, because this is a thing, right? Miami Cubans, right? Miami Cubans are very loud, right? They're constantly, we hate communism and all that. There are Cuban Americans who like Fidel Castro. One of them was on the stream last night. My friend, Mike Martinez from Miami. But the Cubans who like Fidel Castro keep their goddamn mouths shut because they don't want to get deported, right? There was a friend of mine, and her dad, is half Cuban, and he loves Fidel Castro, and he's always ranting about how great Fidel Castro is. And the whole family is saying, shut up. We don't want you to get in trouble. Right. Again, right. There are Chinese people in the United States who love the Chinese Communist Party, but a lot of them keep their mouth shut. And the Epoch Times and the Falun Gong are always out there saying, we hate the Chinese. Well, there's no risk for them saying that. Right. But there are a lot of Chinese Americans who do love the Chinese Communist Party. It's kind of a sliding scale. Probably. I think with China, it's a little bit different because China is such a big country. It's a global power. It's a little bit different, but there are a large number of Chinese Americans who do think that the Chinese Communist Party is good and has done good things, but they're not loud about it. They keep their mouths shut. There is a vocal minority that you see, but most of the Chinese Americans who like the Chinese Communist Party, they keep their mouths shut. And that's generally how it is, right? If you have a government in the United States, an anti-imperialist revolution that emerges, right? You know, you will have a layer of immigrants in the United States that are sympathetic with it, but they keep their mouths shut. And the immigrants who don't like it, who fled from it, are very loud and in your face. The Iranian Revolution is the same way. There are Iranian Americans, Persian Americans who support the Islamic Republic. They're not loud about it. And then there's Iranian Americans who hate the Islamic Republic, and they're very loud about it. So I always tell people, don't base what you think you know about Russia or Iran or China based on what an immigrant tells you, because there are a lot of immigrants who do sympathize with those governments. They keep their mouths shut. But to fit in U.S. society, you generally have to denounce that government. And the ones who do have no risk. So they're very vocal about denouncing the government, and they fled, right? And generally, I mean, if you like the Islamic Revolution, why would you move to the United States, right? If you like Putin, why would you move to the United States, right? That doesn't mean that they don't. And there are some who do for business relations, to go to college, you know, because their family, whatever, but they tend to keep quiet about it. So that's one thing you have to keep in mind, right? You know, I have a feeling, I don't know, but I have a feeling that if you go out to Brighton Beach, you go out to Coney Island, if you really got to know a lot of those folks, if you really got to know them, you could probably meet a fair number who support Russia and Ukraine. But they wouldn't tell you that. They wouldn't admit it to you. And if you showed up and started asking them questions about it, they'd probably think you worked for the FBI, right? And I mean, I don't know what more to say about it. I mean, it was a good question, Gleb, but I'm just telling you kind of the way these things work. The Russians who hate Putin get a lot of attention, and the Russians who like Putin, you never hear from. The other thing that's interesting, right, is that, you know, Coney Island, Brighton Beach, those are people, there's a lot of Jewish folks there. However, I think almost the majority of Jews in New York City come from Russia, right? The folks in Coney Island, Brighton Beach, a lot of them are not Jewish. A lot of them are Orthodox, you know, Christians. But even the Jews in Brighton Beach, they're like culturally Russian, right? Whereas, like, you know, I think the overwhelming majority of Jews in New York City, their heritage goes back to Ukraine, Moldova, you know, Belarus, Russia. You know, they come from Russian-speaking parts of the Russian Empire. They fled in 1910, but they have become Americanized. They become assimilated. They become part of the wider Jewish American scene, right? Brighton Beach and Coney Island, a lot of Jews are from there, but the Jews who live there tend to be, you know, like they're like culturally Russian, which is interesting. It's very interesting. And I don't quite know the nuances of that. I know that there's a history of anti-Semitism in Russia, you know, but there are, I mean, I think you get what I'm saying. I honestly don't understand the nuances, right? So don't ask me, but, you know, there are many Jews from Eastern Europe in New York City, but there is a small minority of Jews from Eastern Europe in New York City who kind of identify with being Russian here in New York City. And it's not a majority at all. You know, but that exists. And then there's just a lot of, like, you know, just Russians, you know, Orthodox Christians, atheists, you know, whatever. And they exist out there. I've been out there. Honestly, I don't know. I haven't been out there since things got going in Ukraine. So I'd be curious how much it's changed. How many Russian signs do you see? Right? Because, you know, you see different things. I mean, I'm in one of the neighborhoods, like near me, there's a lot of Arab American folks. And I noticed that, like, a lot of them have stickers in their windows that say, like, I support the NYPD, things like that, right? A lot of them have American flags, you know, and especially after 9/11, like, things have changed a lot since 9/11. But the Arab American community of the United States really felt a need to, like, we're not terrorists, everybody, you know. And so I wonder, like, you know, I mean, if I go out to Brighton Beach, have they taken the Russian language signs down from the stores? Is there a "we don't like Putin" sign in the window? You know, I'd be curious. I don't know. I haven't been out there really since the war started. Or since the special military operation, you know, began. I don't know what's going on out there these days. So there you go. Would love to see a presentation that explains political tendencies of the new left. Well, I've done that, my friend. Just look into the history. I mean, we talk about practically nothing else on here. But, you know, I mean, the new textbook goes into great detail, and we've I've got many different lectures on that topic. You know, probably the speech of mine that you should watch, Tusker, is called Mao and American Socialists. This was a class series that I gave in New York City. It was just like one session, but it was like a 2-hour session I gave called Mao Zedong and American Socialists. And I talked about the relationship between the Communist Party, USA, and I talked about SDS. I talked about the Black Panthers. I talked about the new communist movement of the 70s. So the speech you're probably that would most be like that you would enjoy, Mao and American Socialists. All right, that's a speech that I gave, a class that I gave a few years back. You know, and I talk about the Communist Party USA and its relationship with the Chinese Revolution, but then also I talk about the Black Panthers and SDS. I talk about the Weathermen. I talk about the different factions. So this is probably the one that you should watch. I'll drop that in the other chat as well. All right, folks. Well, listen, I thought this was going to be a shorter live stream tonight, but, you know, you all asked good questions. So I was on here for 3 hours. So there you go. Look at that, right? And Tusker thanks me for my lecture on Strasserism. Well, there you go. Glad to be helpful. And I gave you a link to my presentation on the New Left. You know, that's what happens. You guys ask me questions about what I know about history and ideology and things, and I get talking. So there you go. That's why I'm here, right? So thank you all. I don't think I'm streaming tomorrow because I have a meeting. We have a CPI board of directors meeting, so I need to meet with them. But so probably no stream tomorrow, but it looks like tomorrow, Saturday morning, I'm going to be streaming with Jerry's Take on China again. That'll be Saturday morning. So that's going to be very exciting. And it looks like I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Shiva, the presidential candidate. He reached out to me and it looks like we're going to schedule an interview. So there's a lot of exciting things coming up in our universe. Join the Center for Political Innovation. You know, we need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Dare to struggle, dare to win. I'll be back, folks. I will be back. So let me put on the closing music. There we go. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.